What's up, guys? It's your boy, Omni-sensei. Welcome to What If I Was Reborn as IZUKU with System Quirk. Part 4. Like, share, and comment on the video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed. Also, remember to check out the original story. Link in the description. With all that out of the way, let's get into it. That was way easier than I thought it would be, remarked Mina, staring at her status screen after less than 2 minutes of making out and letting IZUKU touch her body. Shrugging his shoulders, IZUKU maintained a relaxed smile as he replied, "Affection and familiarity are ultimately constructs of the mind. There is a difference between acknowledging we're dating and actually doing things as a couple. Once certain lines are crossed, it almost becomes natural to cross them again. Man, at this rate you might as well choose King Casanova for your hero name," teased Mina, subsequently asking, "How did you become such a romance expert anyway? You mentioned I was the first girl you'd ever dated during our mock date." Shaking his head, IZUKU asserted, "I'm not an expert. I just don't want to mess things up. So I make an effort to try and understand the people and the world around me." Hummed Mina, placing her finger on her chin as she gave IZUKU a probing look. However, instead of pressing him to elaborate, she gave a light shrug and added, "Well, it's whatever. Now that we're dating, I'll just have to figure out how you tick by spending together. For now, why don't you explain this whole RPG system thing and help us pick out her perks?" Joining the conversation, though she had a somewhat annoyed look on her face after seeing IZUKU's and Mina's markedly more intense takeout session, Quirk added, "Yeah, Achiko isn't the best at explaining things, and Toru has the attention span of a goldfish." Resisting the urge to point out that goldfish had an intelligence stat of 100, IZUKU offered a curt nod, replying, "Sure, but first, why don't we get comfortable? And I mean that in the general sense, not the stripping out of our clothes and huddling under the covers kind of way." "Are you sure?" asked Mina, raising her skirt to reveal a surprisingly adult pair of black lace undies. "Your mom basically gave us her blessing, so we could have a bit of fun before we study." Though his eyes briefly lowered his gaze to take in the view of Mina's undies, creating a beautiful contrast against the backdrop of her pink skin, IZUKU replied, "I don't want the two of you smelling like arousal or shaboink on your return trip home. Though, if you're not just messing with me, I could call you a luxury cab. I asked Momo for the number the last time." Raising her brows, Mina let her skirt fall as she asked, "Do you have the money for something like that? I know you're pretty well off due to your investments and stuff, but those cabs are ridiculously expensive. I think it was something like 200,000 yen just to book one." Shrugging his shoulders, IZUKU replied, "That's a fairly small price to pay for discretion and security. As for my finances, let's just say you'll never have to worry about money for as long as we're together. If I told you the actual amount, it might change how you see and interact with me." "Aren't you exaggerating a bit?" asked Quirk, unable to feign disinterest, as IZUKU's financial situation was critical to making their relationship work long-term. Things would get really awkward if he had to borrow money from Momo to take them on dates. Adopting a wry smile, IZUKU replied, "Enough that Momo's parents and grandfather wouldn't think I'm dating her for their money." "That's a lot," muttered Quirk, a nervous tension building in her body at the realization that her boyfriend had, at the very least, a few 100 million yen in savings. She didn't care much about money, but there was a difference between not caring and not having to, destroying the awkward atmosphere that had begun to permeate the room. Mina threw herself on IZUKU's back, hanging from his body with a cheerful smile as she snuggled up to him and mused, "That's great. I've always wanted a super rich boyfriend who can pamper me." Make sure to take me to an expensive restaurant or something when we go out, okay? If you do, I'll be sure to reward you once it's over." Rolling his eyes, Izuku said, "Say stuff like that once you've gained some experience. But yeah, I'll be sure to take you to plenty of places. Just let me know where you'd like to go, and I'll look into it." Ignoring Izuku's comment about her lack of experience, Mina placed a kiss on his cheek, remarking, "How dependable," before letting him go. Then, after a series of minor delays, the three sat down, huddled up with Izuku in the center as he explained his quirk, helped them allocate their attributes, and detailed various perks. Nem Kyukajiro. Quirk, earphone jack. Bond level, 84. Current level, 17. Effective level, 29. Attributes, strength, 21. Agility, 24. Vitality, 45 to 100 intelligence, 56 to 76. Dexterity, 31. Luck, 44. Free attributes, 0. Perks, healthy body. Nem, Mina Eshedo. Quirk, acid. Bond level, 81. Current level, 20. Effective level, 24. Attributes, strength, 30 to 50. Agility, 35 to 41. Vitality, 81 to 100. Intelligence, 47 to 100. Dexterity, 50. Luck, 48 to 50. Free attributes, 0. Perks, healthy body, acid manipulation. Contrasting Izuku's expectations, the last week of May, transitioning into June, flew by in the blink of an eye. Curiously, even though he had spent a fair amount of time with the girls, they didn't shaboink, nor did they fool around more than just playing. Instead, as the girls had promised when first roping him into the harem route, they mainly focused on training and studying for the upcoming exams. Thus, by the time Sunday came around, Izuku was feeling a little nervous as he sat in an unused classroom with Achiko, Toru, and Tsuyu on his left, and Mina, Momo, and Jiro on his right. Showing up nearly 10 minutes late, Midnight entered the classroom with a bit of pep in her step, smiling as she reached the front of the room and mused, "Sorry I'm late, kiddies. It's been a while since I've done something like this, so I needed to prepare." Voicing the confusion of nearly everyone present, Mina asked, "Midnight-sensei? Is that really you?" Contrasting her usual, exceptionally scant hero costume, Midnight, or more accurately Nomuri Kiyama, was wearing a loose gray sweater, an oversized winter coat, loose socks, and sneakers. For accessories, she wore a pair of red-rimmed glasses in place of her usual eye mask and a woolly black cap. She was clearly the same Midnight Sensei they knew all too well, made evident by her piercing blue eyes and long, spiky black hair. But she gave off the aura of a completely different person. Covering her mouth to stifle a giggle, Nomuri narrowed her eyes as she said, "It might cause problems if you come to associate my hero costume with what we're here to do today. This is how I dress on my off days, but I can assure you, it isn't nearly as tame as it appears." Demonstrating her point, Nomuri shed her jacket to reveal that the entire back of her sweater was missing. It even exposed the dimples of her, but giving the impression she wasn't wearing a single thing underneath. Enjoying everyone's reactions, especially the intense yet dumbfounded look on Izuku's face, Nomuri licked her lips and added, "Also, since this is a sort of off-the-books lesson, don't call me Midnight when I'm dressed like this. My real name is Nomuri Kiyama, but you can just call me Nomuri. Mess it up, and I'll have you call me Mistress Kiyama." Punctuating her words with a wink, Nomuri shifted her gaze to Izuku, her eyes practically glimmering as she mused, "You're quite the little playboy, Izuku-kun, wooing every girl in your class in just 7 weeks. I feel bad for the other boys in your class." Rubbing the back of his head, Izuku was tempted to make an excuse, but ultimately chose not to. As a result, Nomuri went on to state, "Not that it matters. Love is blind, and passion can hit like a truck. If the other boys aren't even playing the field, you're under no obligation to consider their feelings. Rather, now that you've done something as audacious as forming a harem, your priority is making sure these girls don't come to regret this decision for the rest of their lives. Shifting her gaze to the 6 girls flanking IZUKU, passing it over each of them, Nomuri added, "That goes doubly so for you girls. You might think it's IZUKU-kun's responsibility to care for your needs, but you took group ownership of that burden when you collectively decided to date him. You seem to have a pretty good thing going by my take, but everything could come crashing down in a heartbeat if you break him." Turning her back to the class, providing IZUKU with quite the tantalizing sight, Nomuri picked up the digital chalkboard stylus and began to draw as she said, "Because of IZUKU-kun's quirk and a variety of other factors, this, along with any supplemental classes we may have in the future, is a lesson to teach you the importance between balancing work and passion. I will also be your group's counselor from now on, so if you ever have any questions, concerns, or complaints, please bring them to me." Though everyone was listening to what Nomuri was saying, faint blushes began to spread across the faces of every girl present, as their sensei drew a remarkably accurate depiction of a woman with her legs spread on the display, looking over her shoulder. Nomuri's eyes narrowed considerably as she said, "First and foremost, we'll be going over the female anatomy in great detail. Some features may vary, depending on your individual physiologies, but it's important to cover the basics to understand how to trigger dash." Interrupting Nomuri's explanation, IZUKU raised his hand, asserting, "I am well aware of how to satisfy a woman." Exhaling an amused giggle, Nomuri teased, "I'm sure you believe that, but a romantic tryst with a perpetually horny rabbit and sharing the first times of a few schoolgirls doesn't make you experienced. Also, this lesson isn't strictly for your benefit, but the girls as well. Even if you have that nifty little ability that allows you to produce tentacles, you can't pay attention to everyone all at once. Everyone will need to know the basics, unless you want things to be incredibly awkward when you attempt an orgy." Though he was tempted to insist, he wasn't lacking in experience. IZUKU just nodded and allowed Nomuri to continue with her instruction. It wasn't how he expected the impromptu Sunday class to go, but he couldn't deny it might benefit the girls in the long run. With noon coming in what felt like 10 hours instead of 3, Nomuri set down her stylus and stated, "We will now take a 1-hour break for lunch before reconvening here at 1 p.m. If you're not hungry, I suggest you take a nap or something, as this afternoon will be even more exhausting." Though Nomuri's lessons were very informative, everyone, even IZUKU, was completely exhausted by the end of her lecture. Fortunately, just as he was lamenting the possibility of spending the entire afternoon listening to the same discourse, Nomuri licked her lips and added, "I'm going to be testing to make sure everyone was paying attention. That means, rather than a lecture, we'll be focusing on the practical application of the things I've taught you. After that, we'll wrap things up with a demonstration and a final summary. Then, before you leave, I have some gifts to pass out to everyone. I'm sure you'll like them." Finished with what she had to say, Nomuri donned her jacket and strolled out of the classroom. They had been informed to bring box lunches, so she was going to give them some time to chat and cool off before things got really intense. In the wake of Nomuri's departure, Mina deflated in her seat, groaning, "This is way too intense." "Yes, but it's also been very informative," replied Momo, doing her best to appear calm despite the flush coloring her cheeks. "What I'm curious about is this afternoon," remarked Kyuka, her gaze shifting to IZUKU as she asked, if Nomuri-sensei asks you to shaboink, will you?" "I would be lying if I said I didn't want to," replied IZUKU. "However, I told you girls I wouldn't be sleeping around, and I meant it. If even one of you is against it, then that's that. I won't do it." "I'm against it," chimed in Tsuyu. "But I'll make an exception so long as you don't pursue a relationship with Nomuri-sensei outside of class, Ribbit." Receiving support from the school and having an experienced supervisor among our teachers should make things easier for us in the long run. With Tsuyu pointing out that the school was supporting their efforts, Mina remarked, Yeah, I've been meaning to say something about that. Isn't it a little strange how supportive they are? Like, I get that Izuku's quirk is pretty revolutionary and all, but you wouldn't think a school like UA would condone this kind of thing. Smiling awkwardly, Achiko suggested, well, one of the school's mottos is freedom for both the students and teachers. Shaking her head and spreading her hands in a gesture of helplessness, Mina replied, yeah, but there's a difference between freedom and helping one of your students manage a harem. Izuku-kun relieves a lot of special treatment from the principal. With everyone suddenly looking toward him, Izuku adopted an apologetic smile and said, sorry, Mina, but it's a secret I'm not allowed to reveal just yet. I'm sure I will be able to in the future, but not now. Oh yeah, there was something like that, wasn't there? Replied Mina, crossing her arms and rubbing her chin as she muttered, just what could it be? I'm certain that Izuku-kun will tell us the moment he's able, asserted Momo. We would be placing an undue burden on him if we began making random guesses and trying to extrapolate the truth from his reactions. Waving her hand, Mina replied, yeah, I know. I just can't help being a little curious, you know? Does it even matter? Asked Tsuyu. It's much better to have the school's backing than not, Ribbit. Can't argue with that, replied Mina, returning her gaze to Izuku before adopting a mischievous smile and asserting, you're one lucky guy? I won't deny it, replied Izuku, adopting a smile of his own as he added, even just dating one of you would have made me lucky. Dating all of you makes me the luckiest man in the world. With his words eliciting a positive reaction from each of the girls, Izuku's smile became even more prominent. He honestly wasn't sure how he had found himself in this situation, but at least for the moment, he didn't have any regrets. Rather, he was looking forward to the future more than ever. Upon returning from lunch, a few minutes early this time, Namiri's brows perked up when she noticed the pleasant atmosphere lingering within, an alluring smile blooming across her face as she remarked, this is quite an improvement over this morning. Everyone is a lot less tense. Directing her gaze to Izuku, Namiri teased, you must have said or done something to alleviate the tensions. You really are quite the little charmer, aren't you? Shaking his head, Izuku calmly replied, not little, no. I just spoke from my heart, and things naturally became like this. That's good, affirmed Namiri, becoming noticeably more enthused as she raised her hand and exclaimed, speaking from the heart and holding nothing back is the essence of passion and romance. Since Namiri was still wearing her backless sweater, which covered less than a quarter of her thigh, raising her hand excitedly revealed that she wasn't, in fact, bereft of panties. Instead, she was wearing a black thong, presumably a tea-back, as throughout the class, he had gotten numerous glimpses of the lower half of her exposed cheeks. Reigning in her excitement, at least outwardly, Namiri fixed her sweater as she said, well, it's a bit early, but shall we proceed with the afternoon lessons? Come up to the front of the class, Izuku-kun. I'm going to have you answer a few questions. Sure, replied Izuku, rising to his feet and making his way to the front of the class before turning to face the girls. Seeing them staring back at him was surprisingly unnerving, but he did his best to appear calm as Namiri mused. Question 1. What's your name? IZUKUMidoriya, answered Izuku. Nodding her head, Namiri continued. Question 2. If you had to choose between breasts, butts, and thighs, how would you answer? Furrowing his brows slightly, Izuku replied, if I were forced to choose, it would be thighs. My actual opinion is a bit different. Feel free to elaborate, chimed Namiri. Nodding his head, Izuku asserted, beauty is a subjective thing. To me, it's all about balance. Breasts, butts, and thighs have their allure, but if they are disproportional to the girl's natural physique, they are ugly. So long as a woman is fit, healthy, and passionate about something, I don't care if they're tall, short, thick, skinny, or altogether flat-chested. Every girl has their charms. Clapping her hands a few times, Namiri enthusiastically replied, what an answer. As expected from a boy who was able to form a harem among his classmates. adopting a slightly annoyed look. IZUKU was tempted to insist it wasn't his intention to form a harem. Instead, he remained silent, allowing Namiri to continue questioning. Question number 3. What are your thoughts on marriage and having children? Seeing the gazes of some of the girls become noticeably more intense, IZUKU replied, I'm not against either, but I believe it's important to plan for them. Children already have no say about being born into this world, so it's the responsibility of the parents to ensure they can grow and live happily and healthily. A little textbook, but not a bad answer, remarked Namiri. Now, on to question 4. Be honest, IZUKU-kun, but if you weren't dating your girlfriends, would you sleep with an attractive woman who approached you for shaboink? Let's use MT Lady as an example. Since his hesitation was already fairly condemning, IZUKU eventually gave a curt nod, admitting, I would. And why is that? Asked Namiri. Just out of curiosity, mind you. That isn't the 5th question, though he was tempted to say it was because MT Lady was hot. IZUKU knew it was more complicated than that. In his previous life as David, he couldn't even count the number of women he had one-night stands, many of which were closer to 5s than 10s. As for his reason, as ridiculous as it might sound, he hated sleeping alone. Shaking his head, albeit after several tense moments, IZUKU answered, I honestly don't know. The easiest answer would be because she's hot, but I know that isn't the only reason. Then let's move on to the real question 5, said Namiri. If, after shaboinking and parting ways with MT Lady, you were approached by a different woman, let's say Space Hero 13, would you agree to shaboink with her? Though he wanted to say no, IZUKU was terrible at lying in front of the people he cared about. Thus, after another tense moment of silence, he admitted, I would, with a very conflicted look on his face. Can you tell us why? Asked Namiri, her expression softening quite a bit as she could see how much pressure IZUKU was enduring. Yet, in spite of this, he still told the truth. Most people couldn't do that, and more often than not, those that had some very deeply rooted issues. Shaking his head, IZUKU responded, I don't know. I just think it might be an interesting experience or something. Nodding her head in apparent understanding, Namiri said, Thank you for answering honestly. IZUKU-kun, we'll stop the questions here for the time being. You've provided more than enough information to help me make my point. Before IZUKU could ask what she was talking about, Namiri shifted her gaze to the girls, explaining, There's long been a correlation between a person's mental state, the development of their quirks, and vice versa. In circumstances where an individual awakens their quirk during puberty, its influence on their character and mental state is even more severe. I can't say this with absolute certainty, but the development of IZUKU-kun's quirk is likely the result of his desire to feel needed by others. Though he was curious to hear Namiri's conjecture, IZUKU felt obligated to step in, saying, Okay, that's a bit much, don't you think? I won't deny I have some shit to work through, but just about everything you've said can be explained by me being an asshole outside of a committed relationship. If I was in one, I'd never do anything like that. Nodding her head, Namiri conceded, Perhaps. However, while you might force yourself to abstain during a relationship, I imagine your desire is still present. If these girls permitted it, I'd bet my sweater you'd sleep with me right here and now. Nodding a second time, Namiri added, That's what I'm trying to get at. Regardless of the actual reason, you're a boy that views the world around you at a distance, almost like an outsider. While others might crush on a single girl and be content, you look beyond that, driven by curiosity and a desire to know more about the people around you. I'm even willing to bet that before you enrolled in UA, you compiled a list of all the heroines you could potentially date or shaboink with. Am I wrong? With IZUKU at a complete loss for words, Namiri shifted her attention to the girls, adding, That's where you girls entered the picture. IZUKU-kun probably wasn't certain of his chances of getting with an older woman, so he cast a wide net, hoping that at least one of you might be willing to date him. However, because of his considerate nature and genuine desire to do you no harm, He inadvertently caught all 6 of you. Waving her hand before any of the girls could ask questions, Namiri said, "Don't jump to conclusions. While it's likely that IZUKU had viewed you as a backup option initially, that changed the moment he started interacting with you. As he mentioned before, he treats relationships very seriously. I imagine that includes friendships, so he probably gave it his all and did his best to at least appear sincere from the start. And that brings me back to the point I've been trying to make," shouted Namiri, a broad smile on her face. "IZUKU is a boy with a profound interest in others, so much so that it manifested as a quirk that lets him see and quantify their information. Thus, if you're serious about making this relationship work, you'll need to come to terms with the reality that IZUKU wants, potentially even needs, to sleep with other women." Calming down a bit, Namiri added, "Not because he loves or wants to date them, but because he is curious or feels compelled to help them. To that end, I would wager the panties I'm wearing right now that IZUKU has already thought about which attributes I would benefit from and what perks might suit me. Am I wrong?" With Namiri turning her attention to him, IZUKU lowered his eyes, unable to answer her question or meet the gazes of the girls seated before him. "See what I mean," remarked Namiri. "Even if it isn't strictly necessary for him to shaboink with someone to distribute their AP and bestow them perks, it's a very practical method to strengthen their bond. Maintaining that bond is also imperative to maintaining his secret. So I imagine IZUKU is very thorough when it comes to making the women he sleeps with feel satisfied." Returning her gaze to the girls, Namiri licked her lips before stating, "And that's one of the reasons you're here today, to ensure IZUKU doesn't go overboard in his efforts to ensure you won't betray him. He probably won't admit it, but I would wager that IZUKU's greatest fear is that the people he loves and desires to protect might turn on him the moment he fails to meet their expectations." Hearing Namiri's words, the girls felt emotions ranging from anxiety to empathy. They knew about IZUKU's home situation, so it wasn't difficult for them to correlate what Namiri was saying with IZUKU's father leaving him and his mother. Thus, while they felt more apprehensive than ever about their circumstances, they were determined to ensure IZUKU's fears would never come to pass. Clapping her hands together, Namiri shouted, "Okay, that's enough with the serious stuff." Then, with a narrow-eyed smile, she gazed at the girls and added, "Let's move on to the practical part of our lesson. Do you girls mind if I borrow IZUKU for a few minutes?" Exchanging glances with one another, not even Mina or Toru had anything to say. They were still reeling from the revelations related to IZUKU's quirk and its influence on his personality. Being the most down-to-earth among the group, Tsuyu spared everyone the effort of needing to discuss things by asserting, "We already agreed it was okay during lunch, Ribbit." Capitalizing on Tsuyu's response, Namiri clapped her hands a second time, exclaiming, "Splendid," before shifting her gaze to IZUKU and asking, "And what about you, IZUKU? Are you willing to test your knowledge and familiarity with a woman's body with me as your partner?" Forcing a wry smile, IZUKU replied, "If it were a few minutes ago, I would have readily agreed. Now, I'm not exactly in the best headspace for shaboinking, much less remedial lessons." Nodding her head, Namiri's usually seductive smile softened as she replied, "That's understandable. We could postpone classes to a later date or cancel them entirely if they're making you uncomfortable. Just know that if you ever need to talk, I'll be here to listen." Shifting her gaze to the girls, Namiri added, "That applies to everyone here. I majored in behavioral analysis during college, so while I'm not exactly a psychologist, I'm a good listener and more than happy to offer advice in any subject, particularly those related to love." Punctuating her words with a wink, Namiri turned to IZUKU to await his response. She would be lying if she said she wasn't very interested in his power and the circumstances that led to its development, but she wasn't an impatient woman. Boys like IZUKU needed a mature woman they could simply hold or bare their souls to, so she was fairly certain he would seek her out for private counseling at some point. Shaking his head, Izuku eventually responded, "Yeah, I'm just not feeling it today, sorry." "My dear boy, you've done nothing to apologize for," asserted Namiri. "In fact, it's good to stand your ground when things make you uncomfortable. Forcing yourself when you're not completely willing is an excellent way to accumulate stress." Turning her attention to the rest of the class, Namiri added, "That being said, it appears today's lesson has come to an end. Before you go, I have specially encrypted cell phones and tablets to give everyone. You are free to keep using your original phones for personal needs, but if you're going to discuss Izuku's quirk, his relationship with certain pro-heroines, or any of the things we've discussed today, please use the phones or tablets the school is providing. As the USJ incident showed, villains are not against targeting students if they believe it will further their aim. Please exercise due caution when discussing sensitive matters in the future." Pulling out a box filled with military-grade phones and tablets, Namiri ensured everyone got one of each before providing them the numbers to her personal and private lines. After that, she advised them to be off the campus before 7 p.m. before promptly departing without a single attempt at seduction or behaving lasciviously. In the wake of Namiri's departure, the tension between Izuku and his 6 girlfriends was palpable. Everyone wanted to say something, but nobody knew what it was. After all, it was obvious to them that, based on the way Izuku was behaving, he was feeling vulnerable and exposed. Breaking the tense silence, Izuku exhaled an exasperated sigh and said, "I'll be fine," with a faint smile. "I have a few things to sort out, but I can deal with those on my own time. Since we're already together like this, we could study for the finals or something similar." Answering on behalf of the entire group, Tsuyu replied, "It's better if we reconvene another day. I'm sure we all have a lot to think about, so you should take Kyuka-chan with you and return home." Surprised that her name was mentioned, Kyuka replied, "Huh? Why did my name come out all of a sudden?" Without hesitation, Tsuyu replied, "Because if it were Achiko or me, we would try to comfort him. Toru-chan and Mina-chan would feel awkward, and Momo-chan might say, or do something to exacerbate matters, Ribbit. You're the only girl Izuku-chan hangs out with normally, so the two of you can watch a movie or just cuddle and listen to music. Behaving normally is probably the best medicine for this situation, Ribbit." Ku. Though she received damage from Tsuyu's suggestion that she was the most normal girl among them, Kyuka couldn't refute the frog girl's logic. If it were just the two of them, she probably would have asked Izuku if he wanted to hang out, not knowing what else to do. She wanted to comfort him, but she was worried she would make things worse. As a result, it was highly likely that they would just hang out. Rolling her eyes, Kyuka muttered, "Whatever. If no one else is against it, I guess I could at least see him home." Turning her attention to Izuku, forced to stare up at them due to the 17 centimeters difference in their heights, Kyuka extended her left hand and said, "Let's go," with a faint blush coloring her cheeks. Exhaling faintly through his nose, Izuku accepted Kyuka's outstretched hand with a smile. He originally planned to lie in his bed and organize his thoughts, as he so often did, but he wasn't going to refuse if Kyuka just wanted to hang out. Thus, after telling everyone else he would see them at school tomorrow, Izuku permitted himself to be escorted home by the red-faced rocker girl. After separating from Izuku and the girls of Class 1A, Namiri made her way to Nisa's office, explaining the situation and offering her insights into the former's mental state. "I see," replied Nizu, nursing a cup of cocoa with a faint smile. Then, after a moment of silence, he remarked, "I believe our young friend may suffer from imposter syndrome and a form of DPD, dependent personality disorder. Given his background, those are the two conditions that make the most sense." Nodding in agreement, Namiri replied, "I reached a similar conclusion, but it's difficult to be certain since he's remarkably stable for someone with DPD. He is also incredibly conscientious, the complete opposite of a typical DPD patient. It would be more accurate to state he projects those qualities on the people around them, wanting them to depend on him. And thus, the imposter syndrome musetnesu. After spending most of his life believing he was inferior to others, Midoriya-kun likely believes he isn't worthy of the care and attention he receives. As a result, he keeps stacking burdens on himself, driving himself forward like a rocket in flight. Sooner or later, he will run out of fuel and come crashing down. "Then what do you propose we do?" asked Namiri. The last thing she wanted to see was someone as promising as IZUKU crash and burn, not just because it would be a tragedy for IZUKU himself, but for all the people he would invariably draw toward him. IZUKU was the type of person others couldn't help but assemble around, so if he came crashing down, an ever-growing number of people would be hurt. Though it was intended as a joke, Nizu was also being sincere as he said, the simplest solution would be to expel him. If he were left in the care of someone like Yusujiyama-san, I believe they might be able to achieve an equilibrium of sorts. Furrowing her brows, Namiri asked, "Then what of his relationships with his classmates? Are you seriously suggesting we separate them after all of this?" Undeterred by Namiri's growing fury, Nizu exhaled a light-hearted laugh and replied, "As I said, that would be the simplest solution. I never said it was the only one." Taking a sip from his cocoa, Nizu allowed Namiri's anger to settle before saying, "I've actually grown rather fond of Midoriya-kun. There was even a time when I seriously considered grooming him as my successor. Now, I simply wish to see him succeed and, if possible, be happy. You know, I hate it when you beat around the bush," groaned Namiri, suppressing the urge to splash Nizu's cocoa into his face. "Yes, I'm well aware," replied Nizu, taking a long sip of his cocoa before adding, "But what's the point of having hyperintelligence if you can't act mysteriously or withhold the answers people seek?" Setting aside his cup, Nizu turned to face Namiri directly as he said, "I still struggle to fully understand the nuances of being human. However, I'm fairly confident in my opinion that what Midoriya-kun needs, perhaps even desires most, is control. He is far more mature than other boys his age, and his potential intellect may exceed mine in the future. I imagine he feels incredibly stifled, being forced to attend regular classes when he could be training or inventing something new." Blinking in surprise, Namiri asked, "Are you suggesting we allow him to skip the general curriculum classes? Even if that were possible, it would cause extreme envy among some of his classmates. Until work studies begin, there's no reasonable explanation to provide for him being allowed to skip classes." "But there is," replied Nizu. "UA offers CBE credit by exam and booster classes to those seeking to transfer in during their second or third years. If Midoriya-kun is able to demonstrate he has already learned everything the general curriculum has to teach him, there would be no need for him to attend classes." "That might work," conceded Namiri. "However, those exams have only ever applied to students enrolled in general and business courses. We've never offered them to students enrolled in the hero and support courses, since they already have a very streamlined curriculum." "Then the solution is simple," mused Nizu. "We permit Midoriya-kun to take the tests for the general and business departments. If he can pass by those standards, no one can complain. He would have the first half of his day to do as he pleases, while the second half would still be devoted to foundational heroics." Nodding her head, Namiri replied, "I'll admit, while unprecedented, it's not a bad idea. IZUKU had excellent grades in middle school, so I'm certain he could pass the CBEs if we gave him a curriculum outline and allowed him a few weeks to prepare. The only problem with that is..." Adopting a knowing smile, Nizu remarked some of the other students in his class, particularly his female classmates, would endeavor to follow his example. However, I don't see that as a bad thing. UA has always prided itself on the freedom it affords its faculty and students. If others in the hero course can complete the exams of a higher grade, I see no reason to restrict them to a classroom. So long as they stay on campus, training, or auditing other classes, I would view it as a very positive development. Unable to refute Nisa's very convincing argument, Nomuri fell silent, her face scrunched thoughtfully. While IZUKU would doubtlessly benefit from more freedom, she didn't see it as a solution. IZUKU seemed like the type of person who would immerse himself in his work and training to avoid facing real-world issues. If they allowed that, his condition might actually worsen over time. Seeing through Nomuri's thoughts, the corners of Nisa's smile curled upward as he asked, "What is your opinion on asking Rumi Usajiyama to become an assistant instructor, teaching anti-villain combat and guerrilla assault courses for 3rd years?" Understanding the principal's plan, Nomuri's eyes briefly widened before an alluring smile developed across her face, followed by her saying, "She will need a senior instructor to watch over her, but I think she'd make a fine addition to the staff of UA." Despite more than an hour passing since their arrival, IZUKU and Quirk had barely exchanged more than a few words. Instead, IZUKU followed through with his plan to stare up at the ceiling, his right hand behind him as Quirk lay at an angle, using his chest and shoulder as a pillow. "Hey, check this out," said Quirk, showing IZUKU her phone, displaying the image of a fat, disgruntled-looking cat staring at a mouse just out of its reach. "I feel that," muttered IZUKU, a faint smile adorning his face as he turned his attention back to the ceiling. Without another word, Quirk also returned to messing with her phone, swiping through various memes and bobbing her head in timing with the music playing through her in-ear headphones. "This is nice," thought IZUKU, closing his eyes and just vibing for a few minutes. He wasn't listening to music, but the gentle rhythm of Quirk's head bobbing was like a metronome, gradually lulling him to sleep. With IZUKU actually falling asleep, Quirk waited until she absolutely had to go home before waking him, gently shaking his body as she said, "Hey IZUKU, I need to go home. My parents would flip if they learned I was late because I was hanging out with a boy." Though he was tempted to pretend he was still asleep, IZUKU responded with a sleepy, "Right, I'll walk you to the station," before parting his eyes to find Quirk's face surprisingly close to his own. Averting her face and eyes after several seconds had passed, Quirk used the tip of her leftmost earphone jack to poke the center of IZUKU's forehead as she asked, "How are you feeling? You probably don't want to talk about it, but it would be weird if I left without asking." "A lot better," replied IZUKU, surprising Quirk as he used his left hand to turn her face back to him. However, instead of trying to kiss her, he gently caressed her cheek with his thumb, adding, "Thanks, Quirk. Having you here helped a lot. I mean it," as if to indicate she enjoyed having her face touched. Quirk's right earphone wrapped around IZUKU's wrist, generating a surprising amount of pressure as she stared back at him with her half-lidded, captivatingly amethyst eyes and slightly pursed lips. At a glance, it almost looked like she was pouting, but the faint red hue of her cheeks told a different story. Understanding what the petite, purple-haired rocker girl wanted, IZUKU leaned forward to plant a chaste but lingering kiss on Quirk's lips. She had the same pouty expression when he pulled away, but the ruddy hue of her cheeks had become even more prominent as she asked, "Is that all you want?" Adopting a gentle, affectionate smile, IZUKU softly mused, "I have 6 cute girlfriends. What more could I ask for?" Catching IZUKU a little off guard, Quirk replied, "You could ask for a lot more. I mean, it's not good to be selfless all the time. Instead of trying to make us happy, tell me how I can make you happy. So long as it isn't too embarrassing, I'll do it." "Are you sure?" asked IZUKU, the corners of his smile curling up as his eyes narrowed slightly. Swallowing nervously, Quirk adopted a resolute expression as she replied, "I'm your girlfriend. Is it weird that I want to make you happy?" Exhaling a soft chuckle, IZUKU shook his head and whispered, "Not in the slightest," before moving in for another, marginally more intimate kiss. Thinking that IZUKU wanted to make out, Quirk hesitated for a moment before straddling him, linking her arms and earphone jacks around his neck and shoulders before taking the initiative to slip her tongue into his mouth. IZUKU was slightly surprised by her sudden assertiveness, but he didn't make it known. Instead, he placed his hands on Kyuka's hips and enjoyed the feeling of her remarkably light body pressed against his, their tongues entangling for nearly 10 minutes. Pulling away rather abruptly, Kyuka's half-lidded expression belied how turbulent her emotions were as she said, "I need to go home," between labored breaths. "I know," replied IZUKU, holding Kyuka's gaze for several seconds. His actions led her to believe he wasn't satisfied yet. But before she could move in to continue kissing him, IZUKU surprised her by asking, "Can you sing for me?" Looking at IZUKU as if his head had suddenly turned into a mushroom, Kyuka asked, "You want me to sing for you?" in a disbelieving tone. Adopting a slight pout, Kyuka appended, "Is that some kind of sexual innuendo?" "Not this time," replied IZUKU, folding his hands over the small of Kyuka's back as he added, "You might disguise it behind dull and flat speech, but I can tell you have a captivating voice. Deny it all you want, but I've heard you singing under your breath. You're not the only one with excellent hearing." If she was blushing before, Kyuka's face became scarlet crimson at the thought IZUKU had heard her singing. Even her parents hadn't heard her singing as far as she knew, so she ended up peppering IZUKU's face with the pointed tips of her earphone jacks as she shouted, "Forget you heard anything!" As Kyuka wasn't trying to hurt him, her pokes were more like gentle taps to IZUKU's face and forehead, prompting him to respond, "I refuse," with a uniquely hardened expression. Feeling slightly annoyed, Kyuka ceased laying against IZUKU, crossing her arms and snorting through her nose as she said, "Then I also refuse. I'm not good enough for people to hear me singing, even if that person is my boyfriend." Instead of pressing the matter, IZUKU gave a few slight nods, responding, "I understand," before immediately appending, "I'm serious though. You have an incredible voice, Kyuka. Enough to inspire me to want to write a few songs." Blinking in surprise, the pout faded from Kyuka's face as she asked, "You can write songs?" Shrugging his shoulders, IZUKU clarified, "Just the lyrics. I thought about picking up the guitar after learning you played the bass, but I didn't want you to feel pressured into teaching or playing together." Combing back the bangs framing the left side of her face, Kyuka pointedly replied, "I wouldn't mind," before getting back to the original topic, asking, "Since you're the one who brought it up, mind letting me take a look at the songs you wrote? If they're good, I might, maybe just a little, consider singing them for you." "Are you sure?" asked IZUKU, a teasing smile developing across his face as he revealed, "Most of them are love songs." Imagining herself serenading IZUKU with a love song, Kyuka covered her face with both hands, groaning audibly as she thought, "If I had known he was going to ask for something like this, I wouldn't have asked him to be greedier." Jettisoning such thoughts from her mind, Kyuka lowered her hands and said, "Whatever. Just let me see them," with an ill-tempered expression and tone. Offering a curt nod, IZUKU replied, "Sure, but you'll need to get off of me first. Your body is really light, but I doubt you'd be okay with me carrying you around like a koala." While thinking that IZUKU had suddenly become really cheeky, Kyuka got off his body and sat in a huff, arms and legs crossed, as she watched him get up and retrieve a notebook from his desk. Reminding Kyuka of the time, IZUKU suggested, "Come on, you can look at them while I accompany you to the station. As much as I want to keep you here, I'd rather your parents didn't worry." "Oh, yeah, that probably wouldn't end well," replied Kyuka, rising from IZUKU's bed and grabbing her backpack before joining IZUKU at the door. She was half tempted to suggest spending the night, but since IZUKU had wasted his request on wanting to hear her sing, she didn't want to be the one to propose it. "Did you seriously write all of these?" asked Kyuka, her expression one of disbelief as there were more than 20 really well thought out songs in the notebook IZUKU had given her. Both of her parents were successful, fairly famous musicians/songwriters, so she could tell that each of IZUKU's songs had incredible potential. She could even imagine a few topping the charts if the accompanying melody was good. Adopting a faint smile, IZUKU replied, "What can I say? I had a really good muse." While looking down to meet her gaze, turning her head to avoid IZUKU's gaze, Quirk returned her attention to his notebook, rereading the lyrics of a song called "You Are the Reason." She was fairly certain that IZUKU was just paying her lip service, but if he truly felt the way he did in his songs, feeling herself tear up, Quirk swallowed the knot in her throat before hugging IZUKU's notebook to her chest. Her actions caught the latter's attention, but he didn't say anything, just smiling as he thought. Thank you, Callum Scott and Ed Sheeran. Though he could have left her at the station, IZUKU accompanied Quirk all the way to the outside of her surprisingly large house. The tensions between them became palpable, but instead of suing for a kiss goodbye, IZUKU's expression softened as he said, "Keep the notebook. The songs in it were always intended for you. Besides, I've already memorized each of them." IZUKU, feeling a strange sense of guilt, Quirk hugged the notebook even tighter, hesitating for several seconds before asking, "Do you maybe want to come inside? I originally intended to keep our relationship a secret, but since you've already told your mom..." Extending his elbow for Quirk to latch onto, IZUKU replied, "It would be my honor to meet your parents, Quirk, and I would be lying if I said I didn't have at least a middling interest in your room." Thinking IZUKU was making another dirty joke, when he was really just talking about her instrument collection, Quirk's face turned beet red. Despite this, she still linked her arm through his, steeling herself as the two approached her front door. Opening the door with her key, Quirk stepped inside with IZUKU before calling out, Mom, Dad, I'm home." Emanating from somewhere deep in the house, a masculine voice called back, "Welcome home, sweetie. Food's on the table." Though it was already fairly obvious, Quirk smiled bashfully and said, "That's my dad," in a low voice. Shortly after that, a slender, remarkably petite woman with short, straight, dark purple hair and glasses emerged from a nearby throughway, her appearance giving IZUKU the impression of a secretary. She also had earphone jacks for earlobes, so it was incredibly obvious she was Quirk's mother. Seeing her daughter standing at the entrance with a boy, the secretary-like woman, Mikajiro, immediately froze. While kicking off her shoes, Quirk avoided looking directly at her mother as she said, "Don't overreact. It's not that big a deal if I bring home a dash." Before Quirk could finish speaking, Mika, contrasting her fairly serious appearance, abruptly clapped her hands as she shouted, "Kyokuin! Kyokuin! Come quickly! Kyuka-chan brought home a boy." Following Mika's outburst, Kyuka's father, a somewhat gruff-looking man with triangular eyes and shoulder-length blonde hair, came sprinting over shouting, "Way hot! Which brat thinks they're good enough for my little girl?" Coming face to face with IZUKU, Kyuka's father, Kyoto Kujiro, froze in a manner similar to his wife. IZUKU was the same height as him and had an honest face with large eyes and freckles. He expected that the first boy his daughter brought home would be some punk, so he found himself at a momentary loss for words. Adopting a fairly relaxed smile, IZUKU said, "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. and Mrs. Jiro. My name is IZUKUMidoriya, a first year in UA High's hero course. Kyuka-chan and I are..." With IZUKU looking toward her, Quirk adopted her usual pouty expression as she revealed, "He's my boyfriend," in a curt tone. Cupping her cheeks, Quirk's mother, Mika, softly exclaimed, "My little girl is growing up," while Kyoto had a far more unamused look on his face, hinting before asking, "What makes you think you're good enough to date my daughter?" Before IZUKU could respond, Quirk pushed the notebook he had gifted her into Kyoto's chest, shouting, "Just read these, you nosy rockhead!" Though he furrowed his brows, unimpressed that IZUKU had let Quirk speak for him, Kyoto's expression changed drastically when he read the lyrics on the first page, thinking out loud, a song IZUKU had plagiarized from Ed Sheeran. Peeking over her husband's arm, Mika's expression also changed quite a bit, a hint of moisture building in her eyes as she whispered, "Kyo-chan," clicking his tongue. Kyoto closed the notebook, glaring at IZUKU as he asked, "Did you write these?" Nodding his head, IZUKU replied, "Yes, sir," in a firm, confidence-filled tone. This earned him another click of the tongue from Kyoto, but he didn't ask anything more, turning away and walking off with his hands in his pockets, while his wife covered her mouth and giggled at his expense. Then, with a brilliant smile on her face, she stared directly at IZUKU and said, "Welcome to our home, Midoriya-kun. Please take good care of our Kyuka from now on." "Mom!" shouted Kyuka, stamping her foot. "It's not like we're getting married or anything. Can you please just be normal?" Instead of responding to her daughter's words, Mika covered her mouth and giggled a second time, thinking, "Oh, Kyuka-chan, you're just like your father," though he didn't spend long at Kyuka's house. IZUKU felt fairly satisfied as he made his way home. Namiri's surprise psychoanalysis had left him reeling, but after thinking about it, he realized it didn't truly matter. At the very least, there was no need to brood when he had so many good things going for him. Breaking IZUKU from his peaceful reverie, the strangely familiar voice of a girl emanated from behind him, saying, "That look on your face! You're in love with someone, aren't you?" Turning around, IZUKU's eyes widened upon seeing a petite, fair-skinned girl with golden eyes and dirty blonde hair fastened into messy buns. Her outfit consisted of an unkempt, well-worn sailor uniform, including a beige top, dark blue skirt, a similarly dark blue collar, and a red ribbon. But the thing that stood out more than anything else was the fresh, still dripping blood on her face. Name: Himiko Toga. Quirk: Transform. Bond level: 100. Current level: 24. Effective level: 86. Attributes: Strength: 35. Agility: 42. Vitality: 314. Intelligence: 83. Dexterity: 54. Luck: 340. Free attributes: 120. Perks: Party invitation required. "You've got to be kidding me," thought IZUKU, outwardly asking, "Did someone send you? Or is this just a statistically absurd coincidence?" Tilting her head to the side, Himiko, or perhaps it would be better to call her Toga, brought the short knife she was carrying up to her face, sliding the flat of it along her cheek as she replied, "Why would someone send me?" Before getting excited as she asked, "Could it be that you're famous or something?" Exhaling a sigh through his nose, IZUKU muttered, "Bullshit it is," before raising his left hand and making a come-hither gesture as he added, "It was a mistake to appear before me. Now, I can't just overlook you." Tilting her head to the opposite side, Toga remarked, "You say that as if you already know who I am and what I've been doing, but how is that possible? I've been paying close attention to the news, and they haven't reported on me since the incident at my middle school." Abruptly lurching toward IZUKU, Toga's somewhat deranged smile became even more so as she aimed the tip of her knife at his throat. However, long before it found purchase, IZUKU's hand locked around her wrist, gripping it tightly as he said, "Now I'm going to be in a real shitty mood." Dropping the knife from her hand, Toga attempted to catch it with her free one, but lost the chance as IZUKU nabbed and threw it into a nearby street post, embedding it up to its hilt. Seeing her weapon of choice flung well out of her reach, Toga's crazed smile gained a hint of anxiety as she smiled up at IZUKU and asked, I don't suppose you would believe me if I said this was a prank." Exhaling through his nose, IZUKU replied, "I really didn't want to do this," before punching Toga in the gut. The latter was one of the more popular waifus in the Boku no Hero Academia community, but he didn't have the option to try and reform her. She was a mass murderer and well above the age to be tried as an adult. Her circumstances were undeniably tragic, but that wouldn't bring back all the people she had killed. Catching IZUKU by surprise, Toga didn't immediately slump over or pass out. She leaned against him, but she was still fully aware as she groaned, "This wasn't what I pictured when I imagined a cute boy punching in my guts." Punctuating her words, Toga produced a spare knife from inside her skirt, attempting to return the favor by stabbing IZUKU in the side. Instead, as the knife pierced his uniform and undershirt, A metallic sound reached her ears as the blade slid across his skin. "Is this also a prank?" asked IZUKU, his expression stern as he stared down at the stupefied serial murderer. Hearing IZUKU's voice, Toga adopted a bright smile that showed off her rather prominent canines, answering, "Yes," in an innocent-sounding tone, even as she continued scraping her knife along his side, trying to find a weak spot in his bronze skin's defenses. Exhaling another sigh, IZUKU surprised Toga by spinning her around and abruptly putting her in a chokehold, lifting her from the ground as he cut off the blood flow to her head. She tried stabbing up toward his face, but he easily caught her hand, whispering, "Even if your nature is the result of your quirk, those people didn't deserve to die," as her eyes slowly rolled upward, though he was briefly tempted to choke the life out of Toga, sparing her the fate of having to rot away in prison or spend the rest of her life in an insane asylum. IZUKU pulled her into the alleyway she had emerged from, whipping out his phone to contact Nizu. After hearing about Toga's circumstances in the form of an explanation surrounding her quirk, Nizu had a serious expression on his face as he remarked, "What an unfortunate girl," while observing said girl sleeping in the nurse's office, knocked out by Namuri's quirk. Getting straight to the point, IZUKU said, "I think I can help her. For one reason or another, her bond level is already at 100, so if I add her to my party, I could find a perk to cure her. However, nothing I do can change the fact that she's killed people." Chiming into the conversation, Namuri, with a very upset look on her face, argued, "Curing her and then turning her over to the authorities would be cruel. Prison is meant to rehabilitate people, so if the thing compelling her to kill has already been removed, sending her there would be condemning her to suffer for crimes she didn't willfully commit. I believe Midoriya-kun is well aware of that," remarked Nizu. "Otherwise, he would not have contacted us before the proper authorities." Shifting his gaze to IZUKU, Nizu regained his usual businesslike smile as he asked, "How would you like to handle this situation, Midoriya-kun? I'm sure you've thought of something." Scratching the back of his head, IZUKU smiled wryly and replied, "I'm of the same opinion as Namuri-sensei, but our society doesn't accept people like Toga. Even if she's treated and acquitted of all charges, she's fated to be a pariah her entire life. If she's to have any chance at happiness, she'd need a new name, identity, and purpose." Leaving IZUKU a little speechless, even though he expected, Nizu readily replied, "The first two are simple enough to arrange, but there's little I can do about giving such a troubled girl purpose. I could send her someplace she'd be well cared for, but that wouldn't be much different from confining her to a hospital." Crossing his arms, IZUKU remarked, "Her quirk has tremendous potential. Ideally, she could become a student here at UA, but even if she's cured, she'd still have the memories of killing people. Allowing her to mingle with ordinary students before she's had the chance to rehabilitate wouldn't be wise. Yes, I am also reluctant to let her attend classes with other students," replied Nizu. "There is also the matter of her lodgings to consider. We could easily prepare a place for her here on campus, but she would need to be monitored 24/7 until we've confirmed she isn't a threat." Seemingly out of nowhere, Nizu smiled and asked, "What level is your mother, Midoriya-kun?" Realizing what the principal was thinking, IZUKU furrowed his brows and said, "While it's true that I pity this girl, I can't have her living in the same house as my only legitimate family member." "I believe I have a solution for that," replied Nizu, smiling even wider as he said, "Toga-sen will be attending private classes during the day, so you won't have to worry about her then. As for the evenings, we could have an outside-only lock placed on one of the rooms in your house. For additional security, I believe Tashinori-kun would be more than willing to occupy one of your guest bedrooms once he learns of Toga-san's circumstances. With his crisis awareness perk, he would know the moment Toga-san was planning to cause harm." Blinking in surprise, IZUKU found himself at a loss for words in the face of Nizu's extreme but indisputable rationale. He would have settled for Toga being placed into witness protection and shipped off to a private academy far far away from the action. Her occupying the same house as him with a bond level of 100. It was basically the premise for a doujinshi. After recovering from his shock, Izuku replied, "This isn't something I can decide. My mother and Tashinori-sensei would need to offer their consent, and we can't overlook Toga-san's wishes. If she wants to return to her family and is willing to accept the consequences of her actions, we should respect that." Surprising nearly everyone, none more than Namiri, Toga abruptly sat up, displaying her canines as she asserted, "I'm perfectly fine with living with you, Izuku-kun. I don't know how you intend to cure me, but I don't want to go to prison, much less return to those people who call themselves my parents." Providing Namiri some explanation for Toga's inordinately fast recovery, Izuku smiled wryly as he said, "She has incredibly high vitality, more than most emitters at the same level. Weak anesthesia probably wouldn't have much of an effect." Nodding her head, Toga revealed, "Izuku-kun is right. Whenever I went to the dentist to have my fangs pulled over and over again, they had to use an extra strong gas to try and sedate me. I could barely even feel it when the dentist touched my boobs and such stuff." Recovering faster than Izuku and the visibly shaken Namiri, Nisa's smile became somewhat scary as he asked, "Toga-san, would you mind telling me the name of the dentist your parents took you to?" Exhaling a throaty, blood-curdling chuckle, Toga cupped her cheeks and replied, "Oh, you don't have to worry about him. Dr. Susagawa was one of the very first people I killed. You should have seen the look on his face when I pulled out all his teeth and stuck my knife in his gut over and over and over again, asking if he could feel it properly." As even Nizu was left at a loss for words, it was up to Namiri to ask, "Toga-san, were you?" Understanding what Namiri was referring to, Toga waved her hand and said, No, it wasn't that bad. My parents really cared about their public image, so they wouldn't let things go that far. Papa just allowed Dr. Susagawa to touch me a bit in exchange for his silence. I'm still a pure maiden." With Toga's final few words directed at him, Izuku felt slightly nauseous for the first time since he had acquired healthy body. He wasn't upset at Toga, but the notion that her father had permitted something like that to happen made his blood boil. If he knew how young Toga was at the time, he might have become a murderer alongside her. "Oh, are you angry on my behalf?" asked Toga. "But I already killed all the people who hurt me, and I got to ruin the image my parents fought so hard to maintain. You don't have to be upset, Izuku-kun, even if it kind of makes me super duper happy that you are." Shaking his head, Izuku decided to set other matters aside, focusing on the most important one as he asked, "Himiko, Toga, would you like to join my party?" Without hesitation, Toga threw her hands up and replied, "Sure, joining a party sounds like fun. Just wait until you see my sick dance moves. They'll blow your mind, preferably all over my—" Oh, what's this? Some kind of blue window just popped up in front of my face. How weird. This feels really weird, remarked Toga, her brows furrowed as she stared at the droplet of blood on the edge of Izuku's finger, feeling none of her usual cravings. She still wanted to lick it, but didn't feel she needed to. Name: Himiko Toga. Quirk: Transform. Bond level: 92. Current level: 24. Effective level: 88. Attributes: Strength: 35. Agility: 42. Vitality: 314. Intelligence: 83 to 100. Dexterity: 54. Luck: 340. Free attributes: 103. Perks: Healthy body, calm mind. It's better than the alternative, replied Izuku, using a handkerchief to wipe the blood from his finger. Indeed, added Nizu. With this, you have received a second chance, courtesy of young Midoriya-kun. However, given your history, you will need to be monitored for quite some time. I'm fairly paranoid by nature, So I won't allow you to roam and act freely until I'm certain you're not a danger to other students. Shrugging her shoulders, Toga argued, I'd be fine even if you locked me in IZUKU-kun's room all day. I gave up on receiving a proper education once I finished middle school. That was more than a year ago, so I'd be way behind everyone else, even if you faked my age and let me enroll as a first year. I'm afraid this isn't a matter up for discussion, Ms. Toga, asserted Nizo. Your stay at UA is predicated on the fact you're a student. If you refuse to attend even private classes catered to your needs, I cannot permit you to dwell here. Ugh. Realizing she didn't have many options, Toga grumbled. Whatever. So long as I don't have to pretend to be a perfect little princess, I'll attend these special classes or whatever. I owe IZUKU-kun at least that much. Directing her gaze to Izuku, Toga narrowed her eyes and licked her lips, adding, though I wouldn't mind repaying you in other ways. Shaking his head, Izuku revealed, I already have a girlfriend. More than one, for that matter. You're plenty cute, but it'll be some time before I can see you as anything more than the girl that tried disemboweling me. Though she was a little peeved when she heard Izuku had a girlfriend. Toga perked up when he mentioned having multiple, her canines on full display as she asserted, Don't worry, Izuku-kun, I'll show you I can be a good girl. After that, you can be the one to stab me. Over and over again in my special place. Shaking his head a second time, Izuku replied, We'll see. I won't say you have no chance, but it'll come down to whether or not you get along with my other girlfriends. If they don't accept you, or you try threatening them, that's it. I'm already going out of my way to give you a chance to redeem yourself, so I wouldn't take kindly to you stabbing me in the back. No pun intended. Narrowing her eyes in amusement, Toga essentially asserted, No worries there. I have no intention of killing anymore, but even when I did, I always stabbed my victims from the front. Speaking on Izuku's behalf, Nizo warned, You should be more reserved in how you speak, Ms. Toga. I won't ask you to behave like a perfect little princess, but alluding to your days as a serial murderer and making jokes about stabbing people isn't very redemptive of you. Shaking her head, Toga confessed, I don't feel guilty about killing those people. Most of them were people who hurt me, and the rest were people who wanted to hurt me. Discovering a ragged and vulnerable girl wearing a middle school uniform hunkering down in an alleyway inspires the worst in some people. I tried giving each of them the benefit of the doubt, but whenever they offered me a place to stay, the price was always my body. I couldn't just report them, so I killed them to make the world a little safer for truly vulnerable girls. Adopting a marginally more somber expression, Toga added, This world isn't a kind and understanding place to those who deviate from the norm. Not everyone can be like Izuku-kun, taking pity on someone he just met. If even a single person had reached out to try and understand what I was going through, I might not have ended up like this. Shaking her head, Toga raised her face and added, Not that it matters anymore. Those are the problems of the old Toga. The only thing I care about now is ensuring that Izuku-kun and I can be together. You're the one who gave me this life, Izuku-kun. So you have to take responsibility and give me a new name, a new life to live. Though she was usually all about love, even Namiri was a little perturbed by the look in Toga's eyes. Rather than love or passion, it would be more accurate to describe what Toga displayed as obsession. Even with a perk like Calm Mind suppressing her more bloodthirsty nature, Toga gave the impression that the only thing preventing her from pouncing on Izuku was the presence of other people. Fortunately, at least for Toga, Izuku wasn't inexperienced with crazy, borderline deranged women. He once had a crazy ex that went as far as claiming her child with another man was his, collecting his benefits while he was away on deployment. Not only did he lose the more than $10,000 he would have saved up in that time, but he also had to spend thousands more just to litigate the matter and prevent her from collecting even more as child support. Exhaling a faintly exasperated sigh, Izuku replied, If you're serious about asking me to name you, Let's go with Himiko, Tuka. It's lazy, I know, but dash! It's perfect, shouted Tuka, abruptly leaping at IZUKU and squeezing him tightly as she nuzzled her face against his chest. She was tempted to call him daddy for giving her a name, but she figured that could wait till later. First and foremost, she needed to meet the other girlfriends of IZUKU. She hated having to share, but she could tolerate them so long as they didn't get in the way too much. Though she was initially very reluctant to permit a murderer to live with them, regardless of the circumstances, Inko eventually gave in when she learned that All Might would be staying with them to ensure Tuka was on her best behavior. She even felt a little guilty after learning the truth of Tuka's past and upbringing, but insisted that she never be left alone with the lavender-haired girl. As an extra precaution against her roaming off, Tuka had a tracking chip surgically installed under her shoulder blade. If she ever left the campus without permission, even for a short while, she would be expelled from the school and forced to relocate. If she wanted that restriction removed, she would need to graduate. So long as she graduated, the tracking chip would be removed, and she would be permitted to move freely, assuming, of course, she didn't commit any additional crimes. Since she was actually a lot smarter than she let on, Toga had no trouble passing the mock entrance exam for the business course. She was very observant and had a good sense for people, so she reasoned it would be easier and far more practical than the general curriculum. Unfortunately, she was denied the opportunity to opt out of classes by passing the CB exams like IZUKU. Nisa said he would consider it for her second and third years, but until then, she would be stuck attending private lessons alone. A few days after Toga had moved in with him, IZUKU had Mina over alone for a study session. However, due to her drastic increase in intelligence, Mina had already memorized all the information she would need to pass the written test. Thus, instead of studying, she was seated atop a chair IZUKU had prepared, wearing nothing but black lace undergarments as he sketched her. Making things a little harder for IZUKU in more ways than one, Mina played with the band of her panties, pulling up the fabric so that it bit into her as she expressed, "No matter how I look at it, it's really weird, IZUKU-kun. You're living under the same roof as a girl our age. Not only that, she's completely obsessed with you and needs to be locked away in her room to prevent her from attacking you. You even have All Might staying here to keep an eye on here. Why not just send her to a mental hospital or something?" Since he was already used to Mina asking fairly insensitive, but ultimately benign questions, IZUKU calmly replied, "If we're going to start placing people in hospitals because of the influence their quirks have on their minds, I would need to commit myself. As for Tuka, she's not a bad girl. Life just dealt her a bad hand." Releasing the band of her undies with a pop, Mina's eyes narrowed into a devilish grin as she mused, "Just don't get too carried away, cowboy. If you end up sleeping with some stray you picked up off the streets before you've shaboinked with Kyuka or me, there'll be hell to pay." Shifting his gaze to Mina, IZUKU's tone was flat as he remarked, "I'm more than willing, but a certain pink-haired, pink-skinned, golden-eyed, black scarab beauty keeps blue-balling me." Tittering in amusement, Mina resumed playing with the elastic band of her undies as she asked, "Who could that be, I wonder?" Rolling his eyes, IZUKU set aside his pencil and said, "Anyways, I'm pretty finished. Come and tell me what you think." "Okay," replied Mina, bouncing to her feet before moving over to take a seat on IZUKU's lap, her eyes widening as she remarked, "Oh wow, you weren't joking when you said you could draw. With this quality, you could easily become a professional mangaka or a famous illustrator." "I considered it once long ago," replied IZUKU, bringing his hands around the front of Mina's body to caress her abdomen. She refused to shaboink with him, expressing she wanted to do it when everyone was present, but touching, kissing, and just about everything else was okay. June 16th, 2149. As it was Toru's birthday, conveniently falling on a Sunday, IZUKU took her to a nice restaurant with the intent of going to a boardwalk carnival after. Instead, shortly after their meal, she pulled him into a love hotel, wringing him like a succubus for several hours before taking a hot bath together. With Izuku washing her body and subsequently wiping her down, Toru had a content smile on her face as she soaked in the tub up to her chin, reclining against the former's body as she said, "I wish every day could be like this," in a wistful tone. "I'd be lying if I said I didn't," replied Izuku. He had come to terms with being the central figure in a harem, but he was always happiest when it was just him and one other girl. Fortunately, he had Momo to organize his schedule and keep him apprised of events like this, affording him at least some quality time with each of his girls. Then, if you could go back in time, would you? Questioned Toru, raising her face to meet Izuku's gaze. Adopting a wry smile, Izuku replied, "I try my best not to look back on the past, but in this particular instance, I would at least consider it. Time and knowledge of what's to come are powerful tools. There are things I know I could have done better, but more than anything else, I wouldn't have to jeopardize everyone's happiness with my selfishness." Furrowing her brows slightly, Toru admitted, "That wasn't the answer I was looking for," before sinking into the water up to her nose, blowing a few bubbles before emerging a few seconds later to append, "Not that I don't get where you're coming from. If I could rewind time to the day we went to the movies together, I'd do so in a heartbeat. I feel that if I had been more honest with myself, we really might have been able to spend every day like this, together, just the two of us." Nodding his head, Izuku affirmed, "You're right. At that moment, I was prepared to give up everything to be with you. If I had, my relationship with the others would never have evolved beyond being friends. I would also be much closer with the boys in our class, potentially developing a kind of brotherhood with people like Kurishima, Ojiro, and Shoji." Curling up her legs, Toru hugged her knees tightly, a sullen look on her face as she muttered, "In other words, all of this is my fault. All I wanted to do was give the others a chance to be happy, but I ended up making everything a lot more complicated." Though he couldn't deny Toru's assertion, Izuku could spin things a bit, hugging her gently and kissing the top of her head before whispering, "If anything, you've inadvertently engineered a situation where everyone can be happy, even if that happiness is shared among a group. I doubt any of us truly regret this outcome. We just can't help being selfish and wanting more. In a way, that's the essence of burgeoning love. Wanting to be with the person you care about as much as possible." "Yeah," replied Toru, her voice faint as she, once again, imagined having Izuku all to herself. Even if she never became visible, she didn't think she would regret it in the slightest. Feeling he had ruined the mood a bit, Izuku kissed the top of Toru's head a second time, whispering, "We might not be able to go back, but we can make the present and future incredible." Following his words, Izuku prepared to trace the line of Toru's coochie with his fingers, only to stop when a notification abruptly popped up in front of him stating, "It's not too late, you know." "What the dash?" Before Izuku could finish exclaiming internally, he experienced something akin to whiplash, like he was bungee jumping with a rope around his waist as he was dragged through an ocean of color and sound. Oof! Slamming into a glossy, pitch-black ground with tremendous force, Izuku struggled to rise as pain radiated through his body. At the very least, he thought he was in pain until a familiar, profound, and incredibly feminine voice remarked, "You have no nerves with which to feel pain. Raise your head and stand tall, David Declan Griffith." Or perhaps you would prefer to be called IZUKUMidoriya now. Feeling the pain in his body disappear, Izuku pushed himself to his feet, or more accurately, what approximated his feet as he was currently an amorphous mass of hazy, rainbow-hued energy. Raising his head quite a bit, Izuku found himself staring up at a massive woman with tantalizing reddish-brown skin, the most perfect body the human mind could conceive. Messy white hair that cascaded to the back of her thighs, and pale blue, nearly white eyes. She was beautiful beyond words, especially in her fairly revealing white and gold garments. But Izuku felt nothing but frustration as he remarked, "I don't recall dying," in an annoyed tone. Adopting an amused smile, the bronze-skinned woman identified as the goddess of reincarnation, Kruignosis retorted, "Sweet child, I have the power to open the way between boundaries. Bringing you here is no more difficult a feat than blinking my eyes. Though, keeping you here is quite a different matter. The longer a nascent soul dwells within the realm of the gods, the closer it gets to becoming one." Waving her hand, Krua created a shimmering, strangely futuristic-looking barrier around her, and IZUKU appending, "This should give us a bit more time. Now let's get straight to the point." Scooping up IZUKU with her massive, nearly 20 long palm, Krua brought him closer to her face, smiling as she said, "When you died and became a candidate for the title of Paragon, you were afforded a system template and 3 wishes to aid you in your future trials. However, because you rejected them, the power I set aside to vest them still remains. Now that you have a better grasp of your new life and situation, it's not impossible to claim them now." Narrowing her eyes, which sparkled like a milky white nebula from up close, Krua offered, "I could send you back to a specific point in your new life, all of your power intact. Or perhaps pull the strings of fate to make it so that certain events never transpired. If neither of those is appealing, I could offer a simple stipend of 1,000 free attribute points. If you continue to grow at your current pace, I fear you will not be prepared for the trials to come." Furrowing his non-existent brows, IZUKU replied, "Even if there are times when I wish I could turn back the clock, life shouldn't be so convenient. If I can't even live with my decisions and mistakes, what kind of paragon would that make me?" Shaking his head, IZUKU's non-existent expression became serious as he added, "If you want to offer me something, how about information? You told me there would be 3 trials awaiting me before unceremoniously flinging me into the world of Boku no Hero Academia. What are they? And what is the purpose of these trials?" Placing the finger of her free left hand on her chin, Krua appeared to be considering IZUKU's words, doing so for several tens of seconds before answering. "Very well then, I can't provide you with the exact details, but I can tell you that the world you've been dispatched to is on the verge of a convergence. What that is, I can't say. As for why you were sent there, it was because the will of the planet, Telania, requested the dispatch of a paragon. However, because her divine power was lacking, we dispatched a paragon in training. In other words, you..." Before IZUKU could ask one of the many questions that had popped into his mind, Krua adopted a faint smile and appended, "Fortunately, Telania is only a C-rank world on the cusp of becoming B-rank. So long as you give it your all and never lose sight of your center, things will work out. I believe in you, IZUKU." Punctuating her words, Krua blew gently, but because of her incredible size, IZUKU felt like gale force winds had impacted him like a truck. Then, just as when he arrived, he felt like a bungee cord was forcibly pulling him as Krua waved her hand, ending the encounter by stating, "I took it upon myself to make things a little easier for you. Feel free to thank or curse me later." Extending his non-existent hand, IZUKU tried to shout something, but nothing came out. Rather, the moment he extended his hand, he found himself standing in the middle of a familiar street, specifically the one he took when leaving Kyuka's house. Did I get sent back to the night I met Toga? IZUKU asked himself. If so, it meant he had been sent back in time, approximately 19 days, to be exact. Not much happened in that period, but it was still a little annoying since he would need to, once again, experience the incident with Toga. Unless, of course, that was one of the things Krua had changed. Shaking such thoughts from his mind, IZUKU put his hands in his pocket and resumed his walk home. As he did so, he took a moment to check his status, curious to see if any changes had occurred. Krua had yeeted his ass pretty unceremoniously, so he expected there to be at least a few minor changes. Name: IZUKUMidoriya. Title: Telania's Champion. Luck plus 500. Quirk: Digitalization, Transfer, Stockpiling, Singularity, Gear Shift, Sealed. Vargine, Sealed. Danger Sense, Sealed. Black Whip, Smokescreen, Sealed. Float, sealed, current level, 44. 45,194,552 EXP. Effective level, 89. Attributes, Strength, 10. Agility, 10. Vitality, 100. Intelligence, 100. Dexterity, 100. Luck, 575. Free attributes, 85. Rerolls available, 100. Perks, bronze skin, fleet-footed, lesser regeneration, healthy body, sharp mind, nimble fingers, keen senses, lucky, intuition, tripping. Recovering from his initial stupor, IZUKU couldn't help thinking, I should have tried stalling for time, as he recalled Krua's remark about nascent souls growing stronger within the realm of the gods. He wasn't sure how long he had been there, but his experience had increased by nearly 44 million in a single go. If he wasn't just being obstinate and had asked for time, he could have increased his level a lot more. Whatever, thought IZUKU, suppressing the urge to shake his head in exasperation. His new title was a matter of concern, but now was neither the time nor the place to worry about such things. It was a little inconvenient to have to repeat a few weeks of his life, but as he had already lived through them once, he could do it better the second time around. While reliving the days between May 28th and June 16th, IZUKU did his best to uncover what changes Krua had unceremoniously introduced into his life. This included searching the alleyway where his original encounter with Toga took place, and after failing to so much as a single trace, every alleyway within a 5-block radius. With his in-person search yielding no results, IZUKU returned home and did an online search for any news articles related to Himiko Toga. In the past, this would have brought up dozens of articles related to the incident that had occurred at Toga's middle school. One where she stabbed one of her classmates with a box cutter before sticking a straw in his wound and sucking his blood. Now, there was absolutely nothing. It was almost like she had been erased from existence. At least, that's what IZUKU supposed might have happened until a few days into his loop. One of the first, most notable changes IZUKU noticed after his encounter with Krua was that his appearance had improved qualitatively. His height had increased to 175 centimeters, finally making him taller than Momo, and his face had become more attractive. It was no longer round and innocent looking. Instead, he now had a narrowed, angular jaw, sharp eyes that gave him a natural, smoldering look, and much lighter freckles. In essence, his facial features had gone from a 5 to a 9 in terms of appeal, an improvement that had unexpected ramifications. Owing to his physical appearance and the fact he had secured first place in the UA Sports Festival, IZUKU had garnered quite a few fans among the first, second, and even third-year girls. The vast majority were business and support department students, so several had come together to form IZUKU's first fan club, even going so far as to officiate things by assigning numbered badges and getting Namuri to sign on as their advisor/sponsor. Among the girls forming IZUKU's fan club, one, holding the position of vice president, stood out among the rest. When Namuri convinced him to meet the club as practice for future public events, IZUKU immediately noticed her, as she was the same girl that had been living in his house before the loop, Himiko Toga. At the very least, her appearance and infatuation for him were incredibly similar. The real change had occurred with her quirk, as, rather than making her bloodthirsty and requiring her to drink blood, it now functioned similarly to Mr. 2's Devil Fruit from One Piece. June 17th, 2149, after reliving his date with Toru, this time without messing it up at the very end, IZUKU was officially freed from his loop. Not much had changed, but the things that had were fairly positive. Chief among them was that Mirko texted him a lot more than she had before the loop. VRR, less than 5 minutes after his alarm had gone off, IZUKU heard his phone buzzing from his bed. Mirko had been texting him every morning since the start of his loop, and as far as he could tell, this had been the case since the end of his internships. IZUKU wasn't sure what had changed, but they seemed much closer. Reading the text, basically informing him not to slack off or do anything stupid during his training. A smile adorned Izuku's face as he replied, "Be safe on your patrols." As usual, Mirko's response was immediate, telling him that he should be more concerned about himself and the people she was going to beat the shit out of. Before the loop, she would have told him to schmuck off, so it was quite the improvement. Deciding to take a risk, as he had been playing it fairly safe during the loop, Izuku replied, "Love you too, Rumi," before tensing as he awaited Mirko's response. It usually came instantly, but this time it took several seconds before Mirko responded with a fairly tame choke on a carrot, before signing out of the chat. "I guess we're not that close," mused Izuku, still smiling as he set the phone aside to finish getting dressed. Once he was done, he made his way downstairs, eating breakfast with his mom, before kissing her on the cheek and departing for class. "Good morning, Izuku-kun. How did things go with Hagakure-san?" asked Momo, greeting Izuku with a bright smile the moment he stepped into the classroom. "Splendidly," replied Izuku. "We went to dinner, enjoyed some quality time together, and then watched the sunset on the boardwalk. All in all, it was a wonderful time." Narrowing her eyes in delight, Momo brought her fingers together as she said, "I'm glad to hear that. I was worried my recommendation might not have suited your tastes. I'm pleased everything worked out." Resisting the urge to point out there weren't a lot of people who would complain about eating at a restaurant with 3 Michelin stars, Izuku teased, "I can't wait until we get to go out and celebrate your birthday." When was it again? September 23rd. As Izuku had guessed correctly, Momo's smile became especially radiant as she replied, "That's right. Though before that, the rest of us must prepare for your birthday celebration. Speaking of which," leaning forward slightly, even though it was just the two of them present, Momo whispered, "My parents and grandfather will be staying in the villa during finals week. I may have told them you were the reason for the sudden change in my quirk, so they have been pressing me to introduce you." Though he and Momo had yet to shaboink, Izuku had already invited her to his party, boosting her stats and granting her perks. In Momo's case, she could now store excess calories as energy, effectively allowing her to eat as much as she wanted, without overburdening her cells. As a result, she could use her quirk much longer than before, supplanting one of her only weaknesses. Nem Momo Yairother. Title: Hot Secretary. Luck +1 each time you load Insider. Quirk creation. Bond level 94. Current level 23. Effective level 53. Attributes: Strength 50. Agility 50. Vitality 203. Intelligence 100. Dexterity 50. Luck 83. Free attributes 0. Perks: Healthy Body, Big Eater, Encyclopedic Knowledge. Though he couldn't help smiling wryly whenever he saw Momo's title, Izuku wasn't surprised. It didn't happen every time, but he had noticed Mirko's luck increasing during his internship. The same happened when he claimed the virginities of Achiko, Tsuyu, and Toru, so there seemed to be a literal correlation between shaboink and the phrase getting lucky. Nodding his head, Izuku replied, "Sure. I've been prepared to meet them since the moment we started dating. If you want, I can even greet them with you when they arrive." "Then it's settled!" exclaimed Momo, bringing her hands together with a very happy smile on her face. Her grandfather had been pretty insistent that she bring Izuku over, so she was relieved to hear he was willing. If he had gotten nervous and asked to delay the encounter, she wouldn't know how to explain things. In the worst-case scenario, her grandfather might think Izuku was a coward, prohibiting their relationship from then on. June 23rd, 2149. After another fairly boring week of classes, Izuku found himself at the support department's development studio for the first time in what felt like a while. It was fairly active in the chat, but Izuku hadn't seen her in nearly 8 weeks, including Loop, since she never went to the cafeteria for lunch, and he was often busy on Sundays. Entering the familiar workshop, Izuku couldn't help smiling as the aroma of grease and slag filled his lungs. Most people would find such stenches unpleasant, but as an engineer at heart, they got Izuku in the mood to get his hands dirty. With every other support student enjoying their only day off, Izuku was unsurprised to find that the person welding was Mei, her face covered in a self-made welding mask, but her cleavage, shoulders, and arms exposed since she had a habit of wearing a thick, flame-retardant tank top in place of proper PP, personal protective equipment. After donning a welding mask of his own, Izuku approached Mei from behind, remarking, "You're going to give yourself one hell of a sunburn if you keep this up. Also, haven't you heard that the UV light of welding can cause melanoma? It would be a shame if you got some sunspots on your breasts or shoulders." Having forgotten the sound of Izuku's voice, Mei replied, "Can't you see I'm busy right now? If you want to make a request for a support item, fill out the proper forms or bother Power Loader Sensei when he returns with breakfast." "Is that any way to speak to your sponsor?" asked Izuku, who, over the past 2 months, had contributed nearly 30 million yen, the equivalent of more than $200,000, to Mei's projects. Realizing who Izuku was, Mei turned off her torch, setting it off to the side before bouncing to her feet, removing her mask and shouting, "Oh wow, if it isn't the father of my children! Don't tell me, did you come here to make babies with me?" With a beaming smile on her face. Adopting a smile of his own, Izuku replied, something like that. "First and foremost, I came to pick up my costume. After that, I wanted to take you somewhere." Though she was excited by the prospect of seeing Izuku in his costume and watching him try out their babies, Mei frowned when he mentioned taking her somewhere. She wouldn't mind going on a date with him, but she needed at least 2, maybe 3 weeks advance notice. She hated quitting her work halfway, unless, of course, it was to work on something else. Seeing through Mei's thoughts, Izuku shook his head and said, "Relax. I didn't come here to pull you away from your work. Well, I did, but only to show you my personal workshop. Haven't you wanted to see it for a while now?" "Oh, you mean our private love nest?" asked Mei, regaining her smile as she encroached upon Izuku's personal space. She knew about her status as an exception with the girls in Izuku's harem, so she had been looking forward to currying some favor with her favorite, admittedly only sponsor. She didn't have much interest in things like romance, but as long as Izuku kept footing the bill for her tools and materials, she wouldn't mind making actual babies with him. Anyone that could keep 6 girls in line had to be stacked, in more ways than one. Instead of refuting Mei's assertion, Izuku replied, "Probably," before asking, "So, where's my costume? Don't tell me you added it to the ever-growing pile of your babies." "Our babies," corrected Mei, emphasizing the hour before revealing, "And no, I have it stowed away safely in my locker. Someone drew a meat grinder and some other colorful images on it using a paint marker, so I had to strip the surface layer and replace it. It's amazing how petty people can be." Furrowing his brows, Izuku assured, "Well, you won't have to worry about that when using my workshop." Narrowing her eyes slightly, Mei appended, "I believe you meant to say our workshop," once again stressing our. Afterward, she made her way over to her locker, retrieving a rather large black briefcase before lugging it onto her work table and saying, "Go ahead, check it out," with glistening eyes and an excited smile on her face. "First things first," said Izuku, asking, "Mei Hatsum, would you like to join my party?" Grinning from ear to ear, Mei replied, "It's about damn time you asked," while inwardly thinking, "I really hit the jackpot with this one. Now let's see what all the fuss is about. This is insane," said Mei, unable to contain a massive grin as she felt her brain literally tingling with inspiration. Name: Mei Hatsum. Title: Mommy Mechanic. Intelligence and Dexterity +20. Quirk, Zoom. Bond level, 91. Current level, 15. Effective level, 37. Attributes: Strength, 13. Agility, 8. Vitality, 29 to 100. Intelligence, 171 to 175. Dexterity, 103. Luck, 103. Free attributes, 0. Perks, healthy body, vulnerability exploit, spatial visualization. Though healthy body made her feel incredibly refreshed, the perks that had May's brain melting with creativity-induced ecstasy were vulnerability exploit and spatial visualization. The former let her see the imperfections in whatever she was looking at, be it the weaknesses of a person's body or the microfractures within the metal she was working. As for the latter, it allowed her to visualize complex 2- and 3-dimensional objects in her mind, effectively letting her create and store blueprints in her gray matter. Feeling weak in her knees, May plopped onto her plump button, clutching her flushed face and panting in a manner remarkably similar to Toga. She had expected the perks provided by IZUKU to be useful, or at the very least interesting. If she had known they would be this potent, she would have tracked him down long ago. Witnessing May basically blowing her brains out at the realization of her newfound capabilities, IZUKU's expression became somewhat awkward as he warned, "Try not to wet yourself." "Oh, I'm good," replied May, staring off into space with a blissful look on her face. Then, as if she had some kind of switch in her brain or a genuine split personality, she abruptly jumped to her feet, her reticle-like eyes zooming in on IZUKU before she flickered over to him, clutching his shoulders with a somewhat scary look on her face as she declared, "I've made up my mind, IZUKU-kun, you're going to take care of me for the rest of my life." Okay," replied IZUKU, understanding that May wasn't asking him to marry her, but to support her financially and with his system. She would probably spread her legs if he asked, but if he didn't specifically come to bother her, she would likely spend most of her time, focus, and energy on creating new things. In other words, she was the type that was married to her work, viewing intimacy and relationships as secondary or even tertiary distractions. With IZUKU essentially agreeing to be her lifelong sponsor, May gave him a big hug, willfully bouncing up and down to rub her boobs against him. She had long regarded him as her foe/prototype boyfriend, but now she felt compelled to make things official, asking, "Hey, you want a shaboink?" as if she were offering him tea. "Do you?" asked IZUKU, his brows slightly raised, as he didn't expect May to separate from her work so easily. "Kinda," replied May, adding, "I nearly whited out a few seconds ago, so my oven's pretty heated and well-lubed. But we can't do it here. There are tons of cameras, and if Power Loader Sensei comes back, we'll get kicked out of the shop, if not suspended outright." Without waiting for IZUKU's response, May released her hold on his body, grabbing the black briefcase with his costume as she asked, "Your place is on campus, right? We can head over there. Or if that's no good, we can haul over to the forest. I'd prefer not to get ticks in my cooch, but it's pretty rare for me to be this horny. We should make use of it while it lasts." Though he hadn't planned to shaboink May, IZUKU had always considered it a possibility. He also had the express permission of the girls, who basically viewed May as an extended member of his harem, so he didn't hesitate to reply, "My place should be fine. I recently installed some sound panels, a thick carpet, and a quick access hatch I can use to sneak in and out if the situation requires it. We just need to avoid my Ka-chan, or things might get awkward." As his plan to set up Toshi and his mom had yet to bear fruit, IZUKU felt a sense of guilt whenever he brought the girls over to his room, especially if they were alone. He knew how stressful it was to remain abstinent when you had intense shaboink desires, so he had been avoiding shaboinking at his home. He could only imagine how frustrated Inko was to see him bringing back girl after girl, while she was forced to comfort herself. Unfortunately, even though he viewed Inko as a woman, he couldn't. No, it was far more accurate to say he refused to shaboink his own mother. It just wasn't right, no matter how frequently his meat grinder tried to convince him otherwise. Unaware of IZUKU's concerns, May questioned, "You have a secret hatch leading to your room?" before adopting a smile and adding, "That's going to see a lot of use." "Probably," replied IZUKU, fully aware that was the case when he had the hatch installed. Toru, in particular, had already gotten a fair amount of use out of it. If not for his keen senses perk and his phone notifying him when someone accessed the hatch, he might not have noticed when she had snuck into his room, intending to surprise him by laying naked, completely invisible atop his bed. "Well, what are we waiting for?" asked Mei, seizing the initiative to rush out of the development studio. Izuku followed suit, but only after making sure the valves of Mei's oxygen and acetylene tanks were properly turned off and her welding torch was in its holster. Safety was important. Emerging from the hatch connected to Izuku's walk-in closet, Mei waited for him to appear alongside her before asking, "So, this is your room, huh? The carpet feels nice, but wouldn't it be a pain in the ass to clean?" "Then let's not get it too dirty," replied Izuku, surprising Mei just a bit by pulling her into his embrace, wrapping his arms around her body, boosting her up by her remarkably full ass, and kissing her. Though she stood on the tips of her toes and actively reacted to Izuku's, Mei broke free after a few seconds, saying, "Hold your horses, cowboy. I need to wash my hands and face real quick. If I get grease all over your pry bar, I might get sick or acquire an infection when we get to the good stuff." While she loved the smell of grease, Mei wasn't enthused by the notion of getting it in her mouth, cooch, or butt. It might not be so bad for the latter, but she imagined it wouldn't feel very pleasant after the fact. Without waiting for Izuku to respond, Mei playfully snapped her teeth at him before extricating herself in pursuit of his bathroom sink and a towel. As for Izuku, he ensured the door to his room was locked before stripping down to his boxer briefs and sprawling out on his bed to wait. Fortunately, unlike other girls, Mei wasn't the type to take forever getting prepared. In fact, she was kind of in a hurry, so she poked her head out less than 3 minutes later asking, "Ready to feast your—" "Oh, already down to undies, I see." Emerging from the bathroom wearing nothing but her tank top and a fairly simple pair of white underwear, Mei proceeded to tie up some of her pink dreadlocks as she commented, "This is my first time, so try not to ding or do any permanent damage to my bakery. I heard from the other girls you got a bit of a jackhammer on you." Rising to a seated position, Izuku voiced his honest thoughts aloud, noting, "Calling yourself a bakery isn't a bad analogy. I always thought this would be the case, since you have such massive tits. But you've got an enormous cake." Understanding Izuku was talking about her ass, Mei gave it a light smack as she replied, "I know, right? It makes sitting down much easier, but it's an enormous pain when I try squeezing into tight places." Then, as she wasn't entirely sure how to proceed, she sized Izuku up and asked, "So, how are we doing this? Want me to sit down, straddle you, suck your meat grinder, or what?" "Any of the three would be awesome," replied Izuku, "but since it's your first time, you should lie down and do your best to relax. I'll take care of the rest." "Oh, how reliable," mused Mei. However, as she sat down to comply with his instructions, she didn't hesitate to tease, "Just try not to put me in a mating press or load inside me if you don't have protection, okay? I don't mind if you want to put a bun in my oven, but it would cause us both a lot of problems if you did so while we were still in school." "Relax," replied Izuku, holding up and shaking a box of Magnum protections as he mused. "And there's more where this came from?" "Yeah, maybe if you want to destroy me," retorted Mei, denying some of Izuku's fun by promptly slipping off her underwear to reveal a sparse bush of salmon pink hair and a sopping wet mess. She had given herself a quick finger blasting before emerging from the bathroom, so she was ready and raring to go. "That's quite the sight," remarked Izuku, stripping out of his boxer briefs and freeing his fully macho meat grinder as he asked, "How's mine?" Making an okay gesture with her right hand, Mei replied, "Nice. What is that? 21.38 centimeters. And that girth. I'm really in for it, aren't I?" "You'll be fine," replied Izuku, skipping straight to the point as he got on the bed, moving close to Mei on his knees. A little more than 2 hours after inviting Mei to his home, IZUKU was finally trying on his redesigned hero costume. The top was black, with 2 green stripes following the contours of his body, while his pants followed a similar color scheme, albeit with stripes on the outside of his legs. Though IZUKU's base layers seemed relatively normal at a glance, they were actually a state-of-the-art, triple-layered mesh. The exterior was a heat and friction-resistant tripolymer. The second layer was a ludicrously expensive nano-Kevlar mesh that could tank even armor-piercing rounds, and the interior was a special, temperature-regulating neoprene sponge material that gave it the same texture as a wetsuit. The latter made it a real pain in the ass to put on, but it also prevented the fabric from sliding, reducing the risk of tears and chafing when moving at high speeds. Over top IZUKU's base layers, sheathing his arms and legs, he wore ultra-ceramic, incredibly durable and shock-absorbent nanomesh gauntlets and reinforced leggings, the latter resembling the chausse and sabatons of a knight, but a lot more futuristic. The toes and heels, in particular, were formed of the same material used in Mirko's rabbit-themed shoes, so they could withstand tremendous forces without shattering. Completing his outfit, IZUKU wore magnetic manacles around his wrists that looked like cufflinks and would allow him to stick to metal surfaces in a pinch. They were designed before he had awakened Black Whip. But as the latter ripped into the things he wanted to cling to, IZUKU felt they had their uses. Along with that, he wore a utility belt with numerous pouches, a harness to keep it in place, a slim, aerodynamic backpack that included a first aid kit and a defibrillator, and an optional face mask that would let him breathe underwater and filter out harmful gases for up to 10 minutes of active combat or 30 minutes of reserved use. All in all, IZUKU's outfit was aesthetically similar to the original Dekka's, but made from expensive materials and a lot more streamlined. The reason for this was that black and green were simply too suited to him, the result of him possessing piercing green eyes and green hair that cast a prominent, nearly black shadow. If he tried going with anything else, it simply looked wrong. While checking himself out in a mirror, forming his hands into fists, and checking his side profile, IZUKU remarked, "You really outdid yourself, May. It's a bit tight around the crotch, but that's largely due to the harness. I'll get used to it, so long as it doesn't ride too much when I'm fighting." Waving her hand, May replied with a lazy, "Blame yourself for having a big meat grinder." She was feeling drained and a little muddle-headed after IZUKU went to town on her for more than 2 hours, so she was lacking the vigor that usually left others feeling overwhelmed. "Better than having a small one," retorted IZUKU, turning to face the pink-haired inventress as he added, "But I mean it. This costume is awesome, May. Thanks for making it a reality." After covering her mouth to stifle a protracted yawn, May replied, "You're the one who provided the preliminary design and supplied me with all the materials used in its construction. You basically gave me your batter, so I made you a baby. Simple as that." Rising to her feet, May took a moment to stretch with her arms above her head before adding, "Anyways, I'm gonna jet before you get excited and decide to attack me out of gratitude. I'll start using this place once you introduce me to your mother and help me move over some of my ongoing projects and supplies. You seem to have everything I need on hand, but I prefer using tools I'm familiar with." While thinking he might have gone a little overboard, especially with May walking funnily, IZUKU caught up to her as she attempted to leave, smiling wryly as he said, "I'll call you a cab. For now, just relax a bit. I'm not going to attack you, even if I really want to." As she hadn't been looking forward to walking home in her current state, May didn't hesitate to reply, "Sounds good," before suggesting, "And once you finish with the call, we can make out or something until it arrives. You could also touch my butt or suck on my melons. Just no more shaboinking until my cooch recovers, got it?" "Got it," replied IZUKU, guiding May to take a seat before making his way up to his room to retrieve his phone. He had quite a few messages, but as the girls already knew he would be spending the day with May, most were general chat notifications. The only one that wasn't was a DM from Mirko, garnering his immediate attention despite containing 4 words, "Hurry up and graduate." June 30th, 21:49. Though Momo's parents wouldn't arrive for a few more days, IZUKU was seated next to her in the back of a luxury Cadillac, holding her incredibly clammy hand as they made their way to meet her grandfather. "I'm so nervous," muttered Momo. "What if grandfather doesn't approve of you? I don't know what I'd do." "Relax," replied IZUKU, squeezing Momo's hand as he added, "At times like this, confidence is key. If your grandfather sees how anxious you are, he may believe there's a reason for you to be concerned." Squeezing Izuku's hand in turn, a faint smile adorned Momo's face as she muttered, "You're probably right, no, I know you're right. Still, I can't help feeling a little anxious. My grandfather is very influential, so if he doesn't like you, I'm afraid he'll make things difficult for you." "He can try," replied Izuku, maintaining a relaxed smile, as he knew there wasn't much Momo's grandfather could do when he had Nizu at his back. Rather, if Izuku's suspicions were correct, Nizu may have already gotten in contact with Momo's grandfather, laying a foundation to ensure there wouldn't be any significant issues. It was definitely something the little cat-bear-mouse thing would do, smiling relaxedly as he flexed his power and authority over others. Seeing how calm Izuku was, Momo felt a little more reassured, regaining a faint, appreciative smile as she closed her eyes and steeled herself for what was to come. Contrasting Izuku's expectations, rather than being shown to a lounge, study, or dining room, he was asked to disrobe and informed that Momo's grandfather was awaiting him in the mansion's massive, palatial bath. As for Momo, she was summarily whisked away by a team of maids, looking equal parts flustered and confused as they ushered her away without an explanation. Instead of being flustered by the situation, Izuku entrusted his clothes to the mansion's staff before making his way into the bath, finding an old but incredibly muscular man with spiky, mane-like, silvery gray hair seated in the water with his back to the entrance. Inscribed upon it was the form of a vicious dragon tearing through countless foes, the kanji for Yarozo, meaning 8 million gods, running along his spine. Nim Eiichiro Yarozo. Title: Party invitation required. Quirk: Creation bond. Level: 62. Current level: 49. Effective level: 94. Attributes: Strength: 63. Agility: 31. Vitality: 492. Intelligence: 123. Dexterity: 59. Luck: 173. Free attributes: 310. Perks: Party invitation required. Though he wasn't a Yakuza, Eiichiro was responsible for consolidating the Yaroza family's power during an era when All for One's influence was at its peak. His hands had more than a little blood on them, so even when he appeared to be at his most vulnerable, a perceptible aura of surety and fierceness exuded him in every pore of his being. Hearing someone enter the bath without declaring themselves, Eiichiro, in a deep, gravelly tone, said, "IZUKUMidoriya, you're quite the exceptional young man. Some of the top testing scores in the nation, first place at the UA Sports Festival, and a subject of interest among Island's executives. For someone so young, you've accomplished a great deal. You honor me with your words, sir," replied Izuku. "However, until I've completed my principal objective, everything I've accomplished thus far is just a stepping stone towards my goals." Exhaling a light chuckle, Eiichiro remarked, "I wonder, does that include my granddaughter? Is the heiress of the Yaoyorozu family a mere tool to achieve your goals?" Making his way toward the bath, Izuku calmly replied, "I think sir already knows the answer to that question. As influential as the Yaoyorozu family is, I do not need your money or resources to achieve my goals." I suppose not," replied Eiichiro, crossing his arms with a stern look on his face, while Izuku sat less than a meter to his right. As the latter suspected, Eiichiro had already met with Nizu. He hadn't been apprised of everything, but he knew Izuku had the power to awaken the potential of others and enough capital to build a nation and fund a small army if he wanted. While others viewed Momo as a golden goose, doing everything in their power to curry favor with the Yaeroza family. IZUKU was brazen enough to regard the heiress of a multi-trillion yen corporation as a mere secretary. Seeing Eiichiro's side profile, IZUKU was reminded of Sensman Nakiri from Shokuchiki no Soma. His face had deep wrinkles, but he had fierce, dignified features that included blade-like eyebrows, a neatly trimmed, incredibly pointy mustache, and a beard that flowed away from his face like a three-pointed spear. Without looking at IZUKU, Eiichiro asked, "What is your objective? What drives you forward to excel and surpass others?" Adopting a faint smile, IZUKU replied, "I desire two fairly simple things. First and foremost, I wish my mother to live a healthy and comfortable life. Beyond that, my only desire is to leave this world without regrets. To that end, I will dedicate my everything to making this world a safer, more secure place for all." Snorting through his nose, Eiichiro remarked, "What an idealistic farce. Even if you can make the world a safer place during your lifetime, your efforts will be for naught the moment you expire. Without someone to carry your legacy to the next generation, everything you accomplish is utterly meaningless." "And who said I won't have such a person?" asked IZUKU, adopting a somewhat cheeky smile as he appended, "Depending on how things play out, I could have the future head of the Yaeroza family carrying it for me." Though he furrowed his brows deeply, Eiichiro didn't deny IZUKU's claim. In fact, the reason Momo had been whisked away was to prepare for that eventuality. The potential of IZUKU's quirk, his individual aptitude, and his backing was too great for the Yaeroza family to ignore. He was also the only one among Momo's countless suitors that didn't aspire to appropriate their family's status and wealth for himself. Rather, their family benefited almost one-sidedly from welcoming IZUKU into their ranks. After a lengthy period of silence, Eiichiro asserted, "Once the two of you have graduated, you will marry my granddaughter. Until then, you are free to do as you please." While he wasn't fond of being told what to do, IZUKU had already told Momo he would marry her if they were still together at graduation. Thus, in response to Eiichiro's words, he asked, "You're saying that while being aware of my situation?" "It doesn't matter," replied Eiichiro, his tone firm as he added, "So long as Momo becomes your official wife, and the two of you can produce an heir, everything else can be overlooked. The constraints of society have never applied multilaterally to the elite. Those with the power and the means do as they will. Those without do as they are told." Rising to his full height, a startling 218 centimeters, Eiichiro, wearing a traditional fundoshi-style loincloth, added, "You possess a power that can shake the foundation of this world. So long as you are resolved to bear the weight of your sins, there is nothing you can't do." Finished with what he had to say, Eiichiro left the bath, never once looking directly at IZUKU. He was privately a very doting grandfather, so he feared that if their gazes overlapped, even for a moment, he might not be able to resist giving IZUKU a light stabbing. While wearing a comfortable yukata-style bathrobe provided to him by one of the mansion's many maids, IZUKU was escorted to a room in a section of the estate that was considered off-limits when Momo gave everyone a tour. After reaching a particularly isolated section of the mansion, the maid leading the way stopped in front of and gestured to a distinctive red door stating, "You will find Ojo-sama awaiting you inside. As for your clothes, they will be returned to you clean and pressed by the time you are ready to leave. Enjoy your stay." With the maid opening the door for him, IZUKU made his way inside a fairly dark room obfuscated by red, translucent silk curtains hanging from the ceiling, suspended in such a way that they made the room's interior seem like a maze. A bright light shone from deeper within, so IZUKU navigated his way through the cascading sea of curtains, eventually finding himself in a large, open space with a bed, a padded, X-shaped cross, what looked like a wooden horse, several racks of clothes, and a long table filled with various tools. More notably, he found Momo looking very nervous as she sat atop the bed in Saiza, her body garbed in a latex BDSM outfit that left most of her crotch, inner thighs, and Giat exposed, surprising Momo quite a bit. IZUKU remarked, "This is a surprise, though not entirely unexpected." Sitting with her back straight, Momo exclaimed, "I IZUKU-kun, fancy seeing you here." With a beet-red face, raising his brows, IZUKU asked, "Were you expecting someone else?" "I'm hurt." Shaking her head rapidly, Momo replied, "That isn't the case. It's just, I don't really know how to explain this situation. Mother and father never allowed me into this section of the manor. I never knew a place like this existed." Furrowing his brows slightly, IZUKU asked, "They didn't force you to wear that, did they?" Raising her hands and waving them, Momo replied, "No. At the very least, nobody held me down and forced me to wear it. I was brought here, told you would be arriving momentarily, and advised to change. This outfit was lying on the bed, so I put it on." "I see," replied IZUKU, adopting a smile as he added, "Well, as strange as the situation is, it suits you. BDSM isn't really my thing, though, so I don't plan to let you tie me up or whip me." Shaking her head, Momo caught IZUKU a little off guard as she tensed and said, It's the opposite. I just got off the phone with my mother a few minutes ago. She said that if I'm serious about supporting you, I shouldn't be afraid to face anything. That if I truly believed I could trust you, I need to entrust you with my everything." Swallowing hard, Momo stared directly at IZUKU as she asked, "Will you accept my all, IZUKU-kun? Will you take responsibility and make me yours? Because if it's with you, I'm not afraid of trying anything." Though he was a little put off by the situation, IZUKU maintained his smile, replying, "Of course, I've been prepared to accept your everything from the moment we became a couple. Bondage might be a little too advanced for our current relationship, but I wouldn't mind experimenting if you want to try something new." Feeling as though a tremendous weight had been lifted from her heart and shoulders, Momo exhaled a profound sigh of relief, whispering, "Oh, thank goodness," while patting her chest. She had been preparing for more than a month to attempt anal, so there was no way she was ready for something like shuribari or being suspended. She would be lying if she said she didn't want to try them at all, but certainly not this soon. Regaining her usual smile, Momo combed back the bangs, framing the right side of her face as she asked, "How did the conversation with my grandfather go? Present circumstances have made my family's decision fairly obvious, but I'm curious to hear what he had to say." Repeating Eiichiro's words, IZUKU replied, "He said we'd need to get married once we graduate, but we're free to do whatever we want until then. He also knows about the other girls, stating it didn't matter so long as we can produce an heir after marriage." Nodding her head, Momo affirmed, "Producing an heir is an important responsibility. I don't have any brothers, so, as the eldest daughter of the Yaoyorozu family, it falls to us to extend our legacy." Making his way over to the bed, IZUKU asked the obvious, specifically, "Can your parents not?" Smiling wryly, Momo revealed, "Due to the nature of creation, being a power that can destabilize the world's economy, my family has a policy of discontinuing the production of heirs once our quirk has been passed to the next generation. If there were several inheritors of the creation quirk, and one went astray due to jealousy or other negative emotions, it would be an unmitigated disaster." Though it was a fairly extreme tradition, IZUKU understood the Yaoyorozu family's logic. The ability to produce gold bars and other precious metals was pretty ridiculous. But if someone in the Yaoyorozu family went rogue and began producing uranium or other fissile materials, they could eat ice cream and effectively shit out weapons of mass destruction. Yeah, that would be bad. Agreed, IZUKU, adding, "But that's a matter for the future. What do you want to do right now?" As he had just sat next to her, Momo bumped into IZUKU's arm with her shoulder, an innately seductive smile adorning her face as she answered, "Well, we have my parents' and grandfather's approval. I also believe we're trapped here until tomorrow morning, so we might as well use this time to deepen our bond." Raising his brows, IZUKU asked, "Seriously? What are we supposed to do about food? In response to Izuku's inquiry, a rainbow glow emanated from beneath Momo's navel as she pulled out a bagel, explaining, "I can't create living organisms, but so long as I understand their chemical composition, I can produce simple foods. The flavor and nutritional value may be lacking, but I've been practicing to get better at it." "That's kind of broken," remarked Izuku, imagining Yaoyorozu creating the very food she consumed to fuel her quirk. He knew she could create organic fibers and even produce gasoline, the latter of which was almost entirely hydrocarbons, so her ability to produce food wasn't surprising. It was the notion that she was outputting more energy than she consumed that left him feeling taken aback. Dismissing such thoughts from his mind, Izuku's response to Momo was planting a kiss on her lips. He would have ample time to think once they were in the afterglow of their intercourse. July 1st, 2149. Staring up at the ceiling, or more accurately, the darkness overhead, the result of the room having inordinately large dimensions and stage lights shining down on him, Izuku couldn't help smiling. The previous morning, afternoon, and evening had been fairly peculiar, filled with carnality and desire, but he didn't particularly mind. He could be stubborn at times, but he was the type to go with the flow when women were concerned. Such a nature had gotten him into his fair share of trouble, but at times like this, Izuku considered it one of his greatest boons. Unfortunately, even though Izuku had blown his load a total of 22 times over the course of approximately 15 hours, Momo's luck had only increased by 7, 3 from blowing his load inside her, and 2 each from the loss of her rear and actual virginities. There were birth control and morning-after pills provided among the various medicines on the table, so Izuku hadn't hesitated to cream pie Momo over and over again, much to her delight. If Izuku's suspicions were correct, Momo could only gain the bonus from her title once every 3 to 5 days, specifically once the load inside of her, and Pum Pum had expired. She could presumably earn a few extra points a day by routinely sucking his meat grinder, but he wouldn't know for certain until she woke up and gave him a morning blowy. As if she could sense Izuku's thoughts, Momo stirred awake, snuggling up to him for warmth before opening her eyes and adopting one of the most radiant smiles he had ever seen. "What a relief," said Momo, her voice a little deeper than normal since she was still very sleepy. "With how amazing yesterday was, I thought it might have been a dream." Returning an affectionate smile, Izuku curtly replied, "Nope," adding, "It was the beginning of a very long, hopefully everlasting love. At the very least, I feel as though I would lose an integral part of myself if we were to ever part ways." Narrowing her eyes in satisfaction, Momo mused, "You have such a way with words," before bringing her lips forward to kiss him. This started a long, incredibly passionate session of making out. But before Izuku and Momo could get too into things, the distant but distinct sound of a door opening caused them both to startle. Covering their bodies with the blankets, Izuku and Momo waited until a team of 7 maids arrived, the one at the front saying, "We beg your pardon, Zoja-sama Bakama, young master, but you will be late to class if you do not begin your preparations immediately. We will assist you." As she was accustomed to being helped by the villa's staff, Momo didn't hesitate to respond, "Thank you for reminding us, Stella-san. And please inform the chefs to prepare something extra nutritional this morning. My fiancé and I are quite peckish after the previous day's events." Hearing Momo referring to him as her fiancé, the realization that they were engaged hit Izuku like a brick to the head. He knew they would be married after graduation, but he had somehow overlooked the implication that sleeping with her was the same as officiating their engagement. Just as Izuku was in the process of recovering from his stupefied state, Momo abruptly removed the covers concealing their nakedness, exposing him before the group of maids without batting an eye. Similarly, the maids didn't even spare a glance at his macho meat grinder, their expressions unchanging as 2 helped Momo don a bathrobe while another wiped her face. Freeing Izuku from his trance, 3 of the maids approached him with similar intentions, the the one carrying the warm towel, narrowing her eyes ever so slightly as she asserted, "It would be our honor to assist you in preparing for your day, Bakuma." As part of their agreement to have her behave more perversely, Momo and IZUKU made out nearly the entire 30-minute drive to school. Once they were there, however, Momo immediately donned her usual persona, serious and diligent, to the point of refusing his hand. She wouldn't have if their engagement were made public, but as it was currently a secret, she didn't believe they should be acting intimately at school. Fortunately, while he wasn't against it, IZUKU found walking hand in hand or arm in arm fairly inconvenient. His usual pace was much quicker than a normal person's, so he always felt like he was being anchored down when a girl was clinging to his arm. Thus, if Momo didn't want to hold hands, he had absolutely no problems with it. Rather, the more serious and diligent she behaved in public, the more appealing she became. After all, he knew her true self even better than she did. She could deny it all she liked, but the thin black choker around her neck, bearing the inscription "Property of IZUKUMidoriya" on the inside, made Momo's nature very clear. She was an extremely masochistic young woman. More importantly, she belonged to him. With foundational heroics classes being cancelled for the week preceding final exams, allowing students to cram, train, or rest at their leisure, IZUKU could spend his afternoons however he pleased. He intended to use that time to prepare for the CBEs Nizu had informed him about, but he wasn't surprised when the girls invited themselves over to his place, gathering in his room to chat about what he and Momo had done the previous day. "You have a shaboink dungeon in your house?" asked Mina, her golden eyes glistening with interest as she never expected one of her friends to have such an interesting place within their home. Though Mina's outburst caused her to blush, Momo was fairly calm as she answered, "Yes, though I only learned about it yesterday. It was quite the surprise." "I'll bet," replied Mina, her expression gaining a hint of incredulity as she looked over to IZUKU and added, "I never expected you and IZUKU-kun to shaboink so soon, much less get engaged. Guess that just leaves Kyuka and me. I'm starting to get nervous." Adopting an assuring smile, Momo asserted, "There's nothing for you to be nervous about. IZUKU-kun is a passionate, but considerate lover. From the start until the very end, I've never felt more safe, secure, and loved." With all the girls abruptly shifting their gazes to him, IZUKU smiled wryly as he responded with a curt, "I try," before adopting a more relaxed smile and musing, "And I don't stop until the girl I'm with is satisfied." Having experienced IZUKU's attentiveness firsthand, Achiko, Toru, and Tsuyu nodded, the latter affirming, "It's true. Izuku-chan can sometimes be a little too thorough, but feels amazing. Having him touch me is much better than doing it myself, Ribbit." "Yeah, it is pretty exciting," agreed Mina. All she and Izuku did was touch, kiss, and do a bit of foreplay, but it caused her heart to race each time. If he were a bit more assertive, they probably would have already shaboinked. But because she had asked him to wait, Izuku only teased her a bit, never outright pressuring her to give in. "I totally agree," exclaimed Toru. "But instead of talking about having fun, why don't we? Izuku already installed sound panels and stuff, so we could do it right now if everyone wanted." Raising her left hand, Kyuka, her apathetic expression tinged by a faint blush, stated, "That's a little too extreme. Besides, Izuku-kun's trying to study. We shouldn't bother him too much." Nodding in agreement, Achiko said, "Kyuka's right. I wouldn't mind if everyone agreed, but we promised Izuku we'd focus on our studies and training to become heroes. Since the school gave us this time to prepare for the finals, we shouldn't be fooling around too much. They're less than a week away after all." Prompted by Achiko's words, Momo supplied a nod of her own, adding, "My opinion is in line with Jiro-san and Uraraka-san. I also have my status as class representative to consider, so let's postpone this discussion for later. We'll have ample time to chat and deepen our bonds come summer break. I have a prior commitment the first week, and we'll all be attending the summer training camp. but everyone is welcome to stay at the estate the remaining 3 weeks, supposing your parents permit it." "Oh, heck yeah!" exclaimed Mina, keen to see and potentially experience the rumored Shaboink dungeon for herself. She expected that she and Kyuka would lose their virginity before or during Izuku's birthday, so they would have a few weeks to deepen their relationship before experimenting with more advanced plays. Though she was also excited by the prospect of staying at Momo's villa, albeit for very different reasons than Mina, Achiko couldn't help asking, "What will you be doing the first week? I noticed that Izuku is also busy that week, so are the two of you going somewhere?" As she was the one who kept Izuku's schedule, Momo smiled assuringly as she replied, "Worry not, Uraraka-san. While I certainly wouldn't mind accompanying Izuku on a romantic tryst, we would never depart on such a long holiday without informing everyone here." Shaking her head, Momo revealed, "My commitment has to do with my family. My grandfather has invited me to attend this year's I-Island Expo, so I'll be there for approximately 2 days before meeting my parents in Venice. Everyone here is more than welcome to join me, but I only have 3 additional tickets for the expo itself." While everyone was understandably excited by the opportunity to attend such a major event, Izuku was a little surprised, garnering their attention by remarking, "Wow, what a coincidence. I'll also be attending this year's I-Island Expo. I actually received quite a few invitations, including one for placing first in this year's sports festival." "That's wonderful!" exclaimed Momo, clapping her hands together in delight, excited by the prospect of everyone attending the event together. Adopting an apologetic smile, Izuku explained, "I have a bunch of spare tickets, but the truth is that I'll be attending the event alongside All Might, kind of as the school's student representative. I would be happy to walk around with everyone, but I'm not sure how much free time I'll have." Though she mellowed out quite a bit, Momo still had a smile on her face as she replied, "I see. I should have expected as much, given your status and close association with the principal." Nodding his head, Izuku elucidated, "The first item on my itinerary is a meeting with David Shield, All Might's original sidekick. After that, I'm scheduled to tour I-Island Academy's facilities, student dormitory, and exhibition hall. I would have been a student there if I hadn't gotten into UA, so I'm curious to see what I missed out on." "Holy cow," remarked Toru. "Isn't David Shield like the world's smartest man and the most talented inventor in history? I never knew he was All Might's sidekick." "It was a long time ago," replied Izuku. "But yeah, that's the same David Shield I'm referencing. I'm pretty excited since I've admired him since I began developing and modifying patents a few years back." "I'm happy for you," said Momo, stealing the opportunity from Achiko and Tsuyu. She was less reserved now that they shaboinked and got engaged, so she was inadvertently suppressing the more reticent girls with her bubbly demeanor. Fortunately, it wasn't like Momo prohibited them from speaking, so Tsuyu offered a curt "so am I," while Achiko smiled awkwardly, adding, "I hope your meeting goes well. Though, with All Might present, I doubt anything bad will happen." As everyone in Izuku's party could view at least a simplified version of the other members' status screens, Achiko and the other girls present had all seen Tashinori's stats. They were understandably shocked when they first saw it, but had since come to regard it as an exceptional positive. After all, with All Might standing so far above even a powerful pro like Mirko, even the most hardened villains had no choice but to keep their heads down to avoid being defeated and thrown in prison. He was the reason Japan had a crime rate of 6%, surpassing the Netherlands, the country with the second lowest, by more than 7%. "Yeah, I'm not too worried," replied Izuku. "Island security is said to rival that of Tartarus, the greatest supermax prison in the world. Unless they were bats hit insane, no one would be foolish enough to attack such a secure location when some of the most powerful heroes from across the globe are present." Though he was initially certain of his claim, Izuku's intuition triggered the moment he finished speaking. He didn't know if it was specifically due to his comment or if it was related to the Island Expo, but he now had a distinct impression that something, somewhere, was either happening at that exact moment or would occur at some point in the future. What an annoying perk! With everyone agreeing to focus on their training and studies, IZUKU made decent progress in his preparations for the CBEs, temporarily boosting his intelligence to 200 made learning and retaining new information as simple and gratifying as taking a hot shower. The downside was that his general education classes had become even more monotonous, incentivizing him to spend all but Midnight's class studying other subjects. Speaking of Midnight, the R-rated heroine had offered to provide proper guidance after learning about Momo's Shaboink dungeon through the private group chat. Marginally more surprising was that all the girls, even Kyuka, had agreed to participate in her lessons. Instead of going over to Momo's house, however, the guidance took place at a hidden location within the school, presumably Namuri's private dungeon. IZUKU didn't know for sure, as he had been barred from attending the lessons before his birthday. As such, he was in for a treat, or at the very least, a surprise come the 15th. July 12th, 2149, after breezing through the written exams that took place Monday through Thursday, IZUKU and the rest of Class 1A had been gathered to hear the contents of the practical exam that Friday morning. Contrasting Izuku's expectations, meaning he owed all the girls brand new necklaces, Aizawa announced. Now that you have finished your written exams, it's time to move on to the practical. This year, Class 1A and Class 1B will be pitted against one another to see who can destroy the most robots or secure a specific objective within a given period. You can still pass even if our class loses, but it will ultimately depend on your individual merits and cooperation. Directing his gaze to the rightmost back corner of the room, specifically where IZUKU and Momo were seated, Aizawa added, since Midoriya and Yaoyorozu are the class representatives, they'll be in charge of forming and directing the reconnaissance, support, attack, and defense squads. That said, the two of you will be under greater scrutiny, as this exam will also determine if you are qualified to retain your current positions. If you prove incapable of leading your classmates during a crisis, someone more qualified will replace you. Understood. Nodding his head, IZUKU replied with a curt, understood, while Momo responded with a determined but audibly apprehensive, I'll give it my best shot, Aizawa-sensei. Instead of responding to the two, Aizawa passed his gaze over the rest of the class, stating, this is an exam where cooperation is the key focus. If you are seen trying to undermine your classmates, expect repercussions. No less than 16 students are waiting to be transferred into the hero course, so if you can't cut it, that is exactly what will happen. You will be cut from the program. Emphasizing his point, Aizawa made a cutting gesture across his throat with his thumb. In reality, only 2 students were looking to transfer into the hero program for the second term, but that wouldn't have sounded very threatening. The more replacements there were, the more pressure those near the bottom of the rankings would feel. Thus, if they wanted to remain in Class 1, they would have no choice but to give it their all. Finished with what he had to say, Aizawa began making his way toward the exit, saying, change into your costumes and make your way over to Ground Beta. Anyone who fails to arrive within half an hour automatically fails the exam. Prompted by Aizawa's words, everyone in Class 1A jumped up from their seats, retrieving their respective briefcases as quickly as possible. It took at least 10 minutes to reach Ground Beta from the classroom, accounting for the time it would take for some of them to change into their costumes or use the bathroom. 30 minutes wasn't a lot of time, as his uniform was one of the more difficult to wear. IZUKU was among the last to arrive at the rendezvous point outside of Field Beta. There, Classes 1A and 1B largely formed groups with members of the same class, while the teachers, Aizawa and a tall, remarkably muscular man with spiky gray hair and orc-like fangs / tusks growing from his lower jaw, conversed off to the side. Name: Sekijiro Ken. Title: Party invitation required. Quirk: Blood control. Bond level: 58. Current level: 37. Effective level: 77. Attributes: Strength, 83. Agility, 35. Vitality, 493. Intelligence, 65. Dexterity, 50. Luck, 48. Free attributes, 190. Perks, party invitation required. What a creepy quirk, thought IZUKU, even though he also considered it fairly OP. If not for the restriction that the user could only manipulate the blood from their body, Sekijiro, better known by his hero name, Vlad King, could have been a monster. With the right perks, he very well might be. Shelving such thoughts, IZUKU made his way over to where most of his class was congregated, prompting Kirishima to raise his hand and say, "Yo, Midoriya, you finally made it." Since he usually interacted more with the boys during heroics-related classes, none of IZUKU's harem mates tried calling out to him, allowing him to join the conversation between Kirishima and several other boys. Unfortunately, the interaction didn't last long before Vlad King bellowed, "Okay, everyone gather around," in a loud, booming voice. With classes 1A and 1B briefly merging, albeit with a very clear divide between them, Vlad King began detailing the rules and restrictions of the practical exam. They had effectively recycled the rules from the entrance exam, meaning you could earn hero and rescue points by defeating 1, 2, 3, and 10-point villain robots. The key difference, other than the fact 0-pointers were now worth 10 points, was that you could attack and try to detain other students in a jail/holding area. Intentionally inflicting grievous injuries on your opponent was a no-no, but roughing them up a bit was a-okay. Once students were detained, they could be rescued/broken out by their other team members. This meant students had to guard those within the prison, or all their efforts to capture their opponents would be for naught. Furthermore, while defeating villain bots was a good way to earn points, the test would only end once every member of a team had been captured or a specific objective had been achieved. Each team had been entrusted with a briefcase containing the deactivation codes for the villain bots and was forced to defend it in a fixed location. If the opposing team managed to get their hands on your team's briefcase, obtaining and inputting the shutdown code, they would receive 1,000 points in a single go, basically making it a snitch from Harry Potter. Wearing an uncharacteristically serious expression on her face, Momo held her chin, analyzing the map their team had been provided as she said, "Since we don't know the location of the enemy team's base, we'll need to form a scouting/reconnaissance squad. We'll also need people to protect our briefcase and to guard the prison while another group focuses on defeating villain bots." How vexing. As Momo's subcommander, IZUKU remarked, "I'm pretty sure we have the advantage when it comes to scouting and mobility, but capturing the enemy briefcase will be difficult if they have that Vine girl and the guy that can liquefy his surroundings protect it. I think the former might be their warden, but the latter is almost guaranteed to be charged with protecting the briefcase. Then, who do you suggest sending to capture it?" asked Momo, causing nearly everyone to shift their gazes to IZUKU. Looking toward Shinso, IZUKU explained, "If we can get Shinso-kun close enough, he could disable the defense team, or at the very least, interfere with their communications. He should be in charge of the reconnaissance squad alongside Toru-san, Ida-kun, Ojiro-kun, and Tokoyami-kun." Raising his hand, Ida remarked, "While I am certain I would be of great assistance to the reconnaissance team, would it not be better to have me focus on eliminating villain bots and capturing enemies? With my speed, I can move around the city much faster than others." "That's why I want you with the reconnaissance team," said IZUKU. "Your primary responsibilities are to serve as a distraction and to spearhead the main assault on the enemy base. With the enemy's attention focused on you, Tokoyami-kun and Ojiro-kun, Toru-san and Shinso-kun should have a much easier time entering the enemy base and capturing the briefcase." Pushing up his glasses, as he was currently bereft of his white, knight-like helmet, Ida replied with a curt, "I see," before meeting Izuku's gaze and adding, "Then all I have left to suggest is that we address each other by our hero names during the test." Addressing each other by our true names in costume is a habit that must be broken. As such, please address me as Hyperspeed Hero. Mach Tempo. Smiling wryly, Izuku replied, "Sure, though I think I'll call you Tempo for short. For the remainder of this operation, you can address me as Sub-Commander or Paragon." As he couldn't come up with a more clever hero name without it causing him mental and physical damage, Izuku settled on something fairly simple but relevant, dubbing himself Limit Breaker Hero, Paragon. The latter was what he represented to this world, and with his power to boost a person's attributes and vest them perks, it wasn't an exaggeration to say he helped them to break through their natural limits. As he was too suited to fighting and capturing people, Izuku was placed in charge of the main assault/capture squad alongside Siro, Tsuyu, and Shoji hero names, Cellophane, Froppy, and Tentacle. Their job was to basically run rampant near the city center, drawing as much attention to themselves and defeating as many villain bots as possible, while stopping the enemy from doing the same. As such, Izuku didn't even try to conceal himself, standing on the edge of a building's roof with a confident grin and black whip, forming a flickering cape behind him as he awaited the starting signal. "I hope this looks as badass as it feels," thought Izuku, believing his cape gave him a Spawn-like ambience. If he used it well, the functions wouldn't be all that different, leaving most of his enemies feeling helpless, as the power and durability of each tendril matched his own, meaning he could block attacks, tear through buildings, and entangle his opponents with tremendous ease. And that was before his boost. Name: IZUKUMidoriya. Title: Telania's Champion. Luck plus 500. Quirk: Digitalization, Transfer, Stockpiling, Singularity, Gear Shift, Sealed. Fargene, Sealed. Danger Sense, Sealed. Black Whip, Smokescreen, Sealed. Float, Sealed. Current level: 44. 45,201,018 EXP. Effective level: 89. Attributes: Strength 10-100. Agility 10-100. Vitality 204,000. Intelligence 114. Dexterity 150-1500. Luck 500. Free attributes 0. Rerolls available 97. Perks: Lesser Regeneration, Healthy Body, Sharp Mind, Eidetic Memory, Nimble Fingers, Keen Senses, Lucky, Intuition, Tripping. At this point, all I really need is Float, and I'll be unstoppable among my peers, thought Izuku, using his enhanced senses to scan the cityscape for any sign of his unfortunate opponents. Standing next to Izuku, using his tentacles to produce more than a dozen eyes and ears, Shoji remarked, "I don't see any traces of the enemy. They may have decided to focus their efforts elsewhere." "Perhaps," replied Izuku. "But as we're all training to become heroes, it's difficult to imagine them resorting to subterfuge outright. They also don't know the location of our base, so they're probably just hiding somewhere they can observe us. We are being fairly high profile at the moment." Turning to look directly at Izuku, Shoji couldn't help silently agreeing with the sentiment. The former gave off the impression of a seasoned pro, and after seeing what his tentacles could do during the sports festival, Shoji had no doubt his power was comparable to one. If he and Izuku were to fight now, he couldn't imagine getting close, much less doing any damage to him. Nem, Nitosoe. Title: Party Invitation Required. Quirk: Dupli Arms. Bond level: 73. Current level: 24. Effective level: 54. Attributes: Strength 146. Agility 31. Vitality 208. Intelligence 34. Dexterity 88. Luck 39. Free attributes 120. Perks: Party Invitation Required. Interrupting Izuku's and Shoji's discussion, the sound of Aizawa's voice came over the speakers littered throughout the city declaring, "Your 1-hour prep time has expired. Begin the practical exam." Following Aizawa's announcement, hundreds of 1, 2, and 3-point robots which had previously been in standby mode, came to life, broadcasting things like kill, destroy, and exterminate all humans as they began tearing through buildings and terrain in search of students. Finally, muttered IZUKU, the flickering of his cape becoming markedly more prominent as he pressed his finger to the earpiece in his right ear, stating, "I'm going in to try and lure the enemy, look for opportunities to pick them off as they focus on me." Roger/understood, replied Siro and Tsuyu over the earpiece, while Shoji, standing next to IZUKU, said, "If it looks like you're in a tight spot, I'll come to your aid," before extending one of his oversized fists. "See you at the after party," replied IZUKU, extending his fist to bump Shoji's, before leaping from the 40-story skyscraper without hesitation. He felt a fluttery sensation in his stomach, and a sense of vertigo as he fell. But his inordinately high dexterity, amplified further by the power of One for All, allowed him to control his fall using Black Whip like Batman's cape. Then, as he impacted the ground, performing a flawless hero's landing, the shadowy, teal-tinged mass veiled and spread out from him, impaling several villain bots, before IZUKU promptly flung them at several others. "Oh yeah, this is awesome," thought IZUKU, rising to his feet as the tendrils reconvened in the form of a cape. The versatility of Black Whip was amazing, and the more he increased his dexterity, the more effective his control. Now, if he were to train against Pixie Bob or Ectoplasm, IZUKU was confident he could exhaust them completely within minutes. As one of the three-pointers unleashed a full volley of foam-filled missiles at him, IZUKU extended his right hand, producing a tendril for each projectile, piercing them in the blink of an eye and causing them to explode before they could reach him. Immediately after that, tendrils erupted from the holes in the heels of his feet, propelling him upward like a powerful spring just as a gooey, glue-like mass attempted to envelop him. Turning midway through his jump, IZUKU spotted a muscular figure with broad shoulders, a slender waist, massive hands, and most notably, a head that vaguely resembled a glue dispenser. He looked pretty creepy, especially with 7 tiny eye holes from which he expelled his glue, but IZUKU did his best not to be too disgusted, as people with mutation-based quirks didn't have a say in their appearance. Nem Kodrabondo. Title: Party invitation required. Quirk: Semidine. Bond level: 44. Current level: 23. Effective level: 41. Attributes: Strength: 72. Agility: 28. Vitality: 195. Intelligence: 41. Dexterity: 39. Luck: 42. Free attributes: 115. Perks: Party invitation required. Oh, a bond level of 44? Did I somehow piss him off? Wondered IZUKU, even as he extended his tendrils into a nearby building, pulling himself out of the trajectory of Bondo's gluey projectiles. Just as IZUKU was about to rush forward and capture Bondo, a very arrogant-sounding voice emanated from behind him, asking, "You enjoy showing off, don't you?" Feeling his intuition trigger fashionably late, IZUKU deadpanned as he spread out Black Whip from his back, rounding the ends so that they were like fists instead of spears. As a result, the blonde-haired boy trying to touch him was sent reeling. But thanks to Quirk he had borrowed from his classmate, he managed to arrest his momentum fairly quickly, holding his stomach and smiling in pain as he conceded, "That's some monstrous reaction speed you have there, while floating in the air. Nem, netumonone." Title: Party invitation required. Quirk: Copy Poltergeist Vestige. Twin Impact Vestige Bond level: 30. Current level: 27. Effective level: 54. Attributes: Strength: 41. Agility: 44. Vitality: 108. Intelligence: 66. Dexterity: 72. Luck: 210. Free attributes: 135. Perks party invitation required. In response to Monoma's assertion that he enjoyed showing off, IZUKU casually replied, "Showing off is one of the more important qualities of a hero." We exist to inspire people, so it wouldn't make much sense for me to lie low. Snorting in disdain, Monoma resisted the pain in his gut, smiling as he said, "Well, in this instance, I'm afraid it's going to cause you to have to suffer a bit of embarrassment." Immediately following Monoma's words, a gloved fist, flying surprisingly quickly, impacted IZUKU's face. At the same time, a girl's voice could be heard exclaiming, "Ouch! Tough bastard!" from someplace out of sight, the result of the former's face being nearly as hard as concrete. Grabbing the hand before it could retreat, or at least a part of it, IZUKU quickly inspected the fragment of palm in his hand, thinking, "I'm pretty sure I read a few doujinshis about this chick in my past life." Nem, Setsuna Tookage. Title: Party invitation required. Quirk: Lizard tail splitter. Bond level: 61. Current level: 21. Effective level: 64. Attributes: Strength: 28. Agility: 39. Vitality: 247. Intelligence: 49. Dexterity: 91. Luck: 47. Free attributes: 105. Perks: Party invitation required. While IZUKU was distracted, Monoma flew toward him with reckless abandon, presumably trying to use Twin Impact, a quirk that allowed the user to trigger a second, far more powerful blow on anything they struck with their fists. The secondary impact could even be triggered remotely upwards of 10 minutes after the initial strike, so it was a fairly powerful quirk in capable hands. Evading Monoma's surprise attack with a fairly casual sidestep, IZUKU calmly remarked, "Sorry, but attacking me was a mistake. I have no personal grudge against you, but my class is relying on me. As such, I'm afraid your exam ends here." Moving much faster than Monoma could react, IZUKU extended his hand, unleashing several tendrils of black whip to immobilize the princely youth before flinging him hard into the side of a building. In the same motion, he dodged a broad, sweeping wave of glue from Bondo, evading around it to appear before the tall and muscular boy like a dark green blur. Wah dash! Though he nearly regretted it, when Bondo spewed a tremendous amount of glue, IZUKU landed a heavy blow to the boy's diaphragm, forcing him to his knees. Luckily, his temporarily bolstered agility allowed him to move faster than Bondo's projectile spittle, allowing him to avoid being covered in the incredibly sticky substance. "Does he even have blood?" wondered IZUKU, staring down at Bondo coughing up mouthfuls of glue, a similar substance leaking from his eyeholes like tears. Emerging a few meters behind IZUKU, appearing as an upper body with only a single arm, a young woman with medium-length, dark green hair, large, similarly green eyes, and notably sharp teeth shouted, "Hey, give me back that piece of my body. Don't think you can just hold on to it like that." Genuinely curious, IZUKU unhesitantly released the fragment of flesh, allowing it to float back to Tookage as he asked, "Can you feel pain and other sensations from the detached pieces of your body?" While picturing the green-haired girl's lower half floating around somewhere. "Ha! Do you think I'll explain my powers to you in the middle of an exam?" shouted Tookage, her sharp teeth on full display as she grinned from ear to ear. Maintaining his relaxed expression and posture, IZUKU remarked, "It must be so, considering you shouted after punching me in the face. Sorry about that, by the way. And for this as well." Before Tookage could ask what he was sorry about, IZUKU used Black Whip to propel himself toward her like a missile. Tookage's quirk allowed her to split her body into as many as 50 pieces, freely controlling each as if she possessed telekinesis. More interestingly, if the detached pieces were destroyed or moved beyond a certain range, they would dissolve into a misty black substance before regenerating on Tookage's body. Since Tookage's body was missing from her diaphragm down, IZUKU didn't have a lot of places he could strike without being regarded as a pervert. As such, he created a web of black whip from his wrist, causing Tookage's eyes to widen as he enveloped her entire body within a spherical cocoon before tapping his earpiece and stating, "3 enemies captured. Moving them to prison. Stay on your toes." With Tsuyu, Shoji, and Shiro responding in the affirmative, IZUKU collected the bodies of Monoma and Bando, using Black Whip, before racing toward Class 1A's detainment facility with them and Tokage in tow. The trio did their best to try and break free from their bindings, none more so than Monoma. But with Black Whip possessing regenerative capabilities and a tensile strength comparable to Spider Silk, their efforts were ineffective. Seeing IZUKU arrive with 3 captives, Todoroki, serving as their team's warden, offered a curt good work. Before creating a small gap in the ice dome he had surrounding their prison, a large, steel cage that looked like it was used to detain dangerous animals. Depositing the trio into the steel cage, IZUKU offered an apologetic smile as he said, "I hope you're able to be released before the exam ends. Next time, try and choose your target more carefully. I didn't take first place in the sports festival by being weak." Adding insult to injury, the now-whole Tokage loudly complained, "See, what did I tell you, Monoma-kun? We should have played it safe and waited until we had collected a few points before attacking. If I fail the practical, I swear I'll bite your stupid head." Humph. Snorting through his nose, Monoma maintained his haughty demeanor as he argued, "If we didn't seize the initiative to attack, he would have come for us while we were focused on collecting points." "Don't speak when you have no idea what dash." Before Monoma could finish telling her off, Tokage pounced on him like an angry koala, literally biting his head with her very sharp-looking teeth. At the same time, Bando slumped in a corner of the cell, looking to be in low spirits, as glue dripped from his eye holes. It was a fairly depressing sight. So, IZUKU left the trio to their own devices, exchanging a brief farewell with Todoroki before returning to the city center. In the wake of Izuku's departure, Tsuyu, Shiro, and Shoji tried to earn some points for their team, effortlessly destroying the 1, 2, and 3-point villain bots using their tongue, tape, and tentacles. Tsuyu, in particular, left the 2 boys feeling a little helpless, as her speed and agility were on another level compared to what she displayed in training. Tsuyu as a title, Tongue Goddess, Dexterity plus 50. Quirk, Frog, Bond level 93. Current level 25. Effective level 47. Attributes, Strength 33. Agility 71. Vitality 100. Intelligence 82. Dexterity 128. Luck 51. Free attributes 0. Perks, thermoregulation, healthy body, godly tongue. Using her tongue like a lightning-fast whip, Tsuyu casually flicked off the head of a 3-pointer before leaping tens of meters, briefly adhering to the side of a building before kicking off of it with enough force to send spiderweb cracks through the reinforced windowed plating. Having joined up with Shoji to take on a 10-pointer, a wry smile marred Shiro's face as he remarked, "Is it just me, or have all the girls in our class become super strong recently?" Though he had also noticed the rather explosive growth of the girls, Shoji chose not to comment on Shiro's observation. It was fairly obvious to him and a few others what was happening, but they had agreed not to discuss it since IZUKU was their friend. They might have said something if it looked like IZUKU was too timing or taking advantage of their classmates, but with how closely knit the girls in class were, the only logical explanation was that they had reached a compromise of some kind. "Stay focused," said Shoji, splitting his tentacles to produce 10 fists as he launched himself at the rampaging 10-pointer. As he did so, Shiro shot a white, tape-like substance from the dispensers in his elbows, attaching the ends to 2 different buildings before retracting them rapidly, flinging himself into the air like a slingshot. He was one of the few people in Class 1A who hadn't realized what was going on, but he didn't press the matter as now was neither the time nor the place for idle conversation. In the midst of Izuku's return trip to the city center, Momo's voice came over his earpiece ordering, "Paragon, please make your way to point C2. Mind Jack Shinso has requested assistance. Tapping his earpiece, IZUKU responded with a curt Roger, before using Black Whip to abruptly change directions, pulling himself from building to building rather than swinging like Spider-Man. He had attempted it once, but that shit was terrifying. As IZUKU had predicted, Class 1B had left Juzo Hananuki hero name, Mudman, to defend their base. This made it nearly impossible for anyone to get inside, as the entire building looked like a mud patty on the surface, meaning they would need to sift or swim through tens of meters of semi-liquid concrete, steel, and glass to have even a slight chance of attaining one B's briefcase. Making things even more difficult for the reconnaissance squad, Itsuka Kendo, hero name, Battle Fist, had left behind many of her class's most troublesome quirk users to reinforce their defense. This included Kanoko Komori Shemage, Manga Fukudashi Comic Man, Yosetsu Away's Welder, and Jiroda Shishida Gavaden. Komori's quirk, in particular, was proving to be a massive pain, as she was capable of spreading microscopic spores through an area, instantaneously sprouting mushrooms on whatever they touched. This included people's bodies, and if they were unlucky enough to inhale them, the mushrooms could even sprout in their lungs. Damn it, groaned Shinso, plucking what must have been the 100th mushroom from his body. Even after he had retreated from the area most affected by Komori's quirk, mushrooms would occasionally sprout on his body, the result of each mushroom producing spores of its own. "This is driving me crazy," complained Toru, her invisible body covered in dozens, if not hundreds, of mushrooms. The spores reacted faster when exposed to moisture, so her particular hero costume was a tremendous disadvantage against an opponent like Komori. Feeling a little sorry for Toru, Ojiro scratched his cheek, averting his eyes from her mushroom-covered form as he suggested, "Why don't you pull back for the time being, Hagakure-san? There isn't much we can do now, so you should find someplace to deal with those mushrooms while we dash." Interrupting Ojiro's words, a massive, muscular figure covered in brown fur and wearing dark sunglasses smashed through the wall of the building they were huddled inside, roaring, "Found you!" while trying to grab Toru with his enormous hand. Reacting almost instantaneously, despite the fact he was just as surprised as Shinso and Toru, Ojiro kicked the massive, furry figure in his jaw before spinning midair, following up with a mighty tail whip. There was a notable difference in their sizes, but Ojiro's thick, prehensile tail was practically all muscle. He could only bench press a few hundred kilograms with his arms, but when he used his tail, even 2,000 kilograms wasn't out of the question. Growing larger and even fluffier than before, the feral-looking man wiped his face and roared, "Not bad, but even if you've got a kick like a truck, it'll take more than that to take me out." Seemingly oblivious to the presence of Shinso and Toru, the beastly man, Jiroda Shishida, charged at Ojiro on all fours. His quirk beast amplified his bestial traits even further, providing him enhanced senses, strength, and increased size. The downside was that he became more animalistic the longer he was transformed, causing him to make increasingly reckless decisions and giving him tunnel vision whenever he encountered a strong foe. In this case, that was Ojiro, so Shishida charged him with the simple-minded intention of determining which of them was stronger. Reaching his point C2 in less than a minute, the first things Izuku noticed were the melted building he assumed was Class 1B's base, countless mushrooms, and the twin channels cutting through the goopy terrain. He assumed the latter was the result of Ida running through the area, a notion that was quickly confirmed when a clangorous kapow reached his ears, accompanied by the appearance of the word itself, shattering the glass panels of a nearby skyscraper. Making a beeline toward the destruction, Izuku found Ida in the middle of battling against a boy with a two-dimensional speech bubble in place of a head, and another one with spiky black hair, and a costume comprised of thick leather and metal plates. Name: Manga Fukudashi. Title: Party invitation required. Quirk comic. Bond level: 52. Current level: 22. Effective level: 43. Attributes: Strength, 28. Agility, 31. Vitality, 218. Intelligence, 53. Dexterity, 35. Luck, 71. Free attributes, 110. Perks: Party invitation required. Name: Yosetsu Aways. Title: Party invitation required. Quirk: Weld. Bond level: 59. Current level: 23. Effective level: 35. Attributes: Strength, 61. Agility, 35. Vitality, 92. Intelligence, 61. Dexterity, 44. Luck, 58. Free attributes, 110. Perks: Party invitation required. With Away's quirk allowing him to fuse both organic and inorganic matter at the subatomic level, Ida was at a disadvantage after having a series of heavy tungsten logs fused to his costume. Most of them were on the left side of his body, including one in his calf. So, while the weight wasn't that great, they ruined his balance and made it impossible for him to take full advantage of his speed. "Mind if I join the party?" shouted Izuku, dropping in on Fukudashi and Aways before they noticed his presence. The former blasted a gasp at him, emerging from his startled speech bubble of a head like a train car, but Izuku pulled a Dr. Octavius, sidestepping with the use of Black Whip as he teased, "I wonder if you produce effects when you take hits?" Without waiting for Fukudashi to respond, Izuku sent a fist-sized tendril crashing into the youth's stomach, causing his head to abruptly turn into an exclamation point before he collapsed to his knees. Black Whip could extend up to 100 meters in the blink of an eye, so it was virtually impossible for inexperienced students of Class 1B2 react to, much less evade, not without a speed or perception-based quirk. Seeing how effortlessly Fukudashi was defeated, Aways abruptly raised his hands in a gesture of surrender, smiling awkwardly as he said, "Let's not be too hasty now." "Sure," replied Izuku. "Remove the tungsten logs from Mach Turbo's body, and I'll allow you to surrender peacefully. Refuse, and we'll stress test the durability of that metal plate covering your torso." Emphasizing his point, Izuku picked up a piece of debris with Black Whip, crushing it with ease. Thus, while Aways was fairly confident in both his strength and his quirk, he made the very smart decision to concede. His quirk required him to make physical contact with his target, so with Izuku able to move around and attack at blinding speeds, he knew there wasn't much he could do to flip the odds in his favor. Izuku was just too strong. Freed from his restraints, Ida gave a very steep bow to Izuku, exclaiming, "I thank you for your assistance, Paragon. Please allow me to take these two N-duels off your hands and escort them to the prison." Responding with a casual, two-fingered salute, Izuku replied, "Then I'll entrust them to your capable hands," before abruptly launching himself into the air and rushing toward the sounds of destruction emanating from a few buildings away. He was starting to feel like his presence in the exam was cheating, but this was simply the reality of a quirk-based society. Not everyone was created equally, so when incomprehensible outliers like All For One and All Might appeared, everyone else was reduced to rendering support or serving as a background character. Reaching the building where Ojiro was locked in a fairly close battle with the beast-like Shishida, Izuku unhesitantly intruded on the battle, moving through the building's interior like a dark green blur, grabbing and pinning the muscular furry to one of the building's support pillars with Black Whip. Nem, Jirota Siside. Title: Party invitation required. Quirk Beast. Bond level: 48. Current level: 28. Effective level: 75. Attributes: Strength: 153. Agility: 54. Vitality: 315. Intelligence: 40. Dexterity: 72. Luck: 119. Free attributes: 140. Perks: Party invitation required. Pretty strong, thought Izuku, even though he had no trouble keeping Shishida pinned to the support pillar. Tugging his bindings futilely, Shishida unleashed a loud, unintelligible roar that caused his body to swell visibly. More impressively, his strength shot up to around 200 and kept climbing, but it came at the cost of his vitality and intelligence. Just as IZUKU was thinking Shishida was going to exhaust himself, the fur-covered youth abruptly canceled his transformation, shrinking in size just enough to allow him to escape Black Whip's binding. With Shishida immediately resuming his transformation after breaking free, IZUKU exhaled an impressed "ho" as he evaded the powerful but increasingly slow youth. "You're quite strong," remarked IZUKU. "By the time we graduate, you may very well be at the top of your class." Punctuating his words, IZUKU dodged one of Shishida's highly telegraphed punches, burying his fist into the surprisingly soft fur of the youth's gut as he confidently asserted, "But the person who will stand at the very top is me," as even those with strength and durability-enhancing quirks needed to breathe. Shishida toppled over just like anyone else who had their diaphragm forcibly compressed, forcing the air from their lungs. He would have recovered much faster, but IZUKU was fully aware of that, following up the initial blow with a weakened but effective knee strike to the center of Shishida's forehead, shattering his fairly expensive sunglasses. Allowing the youth to crumple to the ground, IZUKU adopted a wry smile as he remarked, "I'll be sure to buy you a replacement pair once this is over." Then, turning his attention to the astonished Ojiro, he asked, "You okay?" Startling when IZUKU addressed him, Ojiro adopted a smile of his own, replying, "Yeah," before rubbing the back of his head. He wasn't sure of his chances against Shishida, but he was determined to keep fighting to the very end. Having IZUKU come out of nowhere, blitzing and defeating his opponent with tremendous ease, felt uncomfortable, causing Ojiro to feel even more awkward. Toru abruptly appeared out of nowhere, pouncing on IZUKU as she exclaimed, "IZUKU, help me!" in a frustrated, tearful-sounding tone. Seeing the innumerable mushrooms covering Toru's body, a frown marred IZUKU's face as he plucked one from her invisible shoulder. As he did so, several smaller mushrooms sprouted in its place, growing slowly but at a rate visible to the naked eye. Recalling that Komori should possess a disinfectant that could negate the endlessly proliferating spores, IZUKU asserted, "Give me a few minutes. I'll catch the person responsible for this." Releasing IZUKU's body, Toru sounded even more frustrated as she said, "Please just hurry it up." The feeling of being covered in mushrooms was awful, especially when there were more than a few growing in areas that weren't appropriate to mention in public. Not wanting to prolong Toru's suffering, IZUKU exited through the hole created by Shishida, racing in the direction of a petite but surprisingly busted girl with honey-brown hair bobbed to resemble a mushroom. Her hero costume was also mushroom-themed, consisting of a turtleneck dress with long sleeves and furred cuffs. Its base was toadstool red, and it was covered in white polka dots, matching the frilly, three-tiered socks she wore over her pink stompers. Nem Kinokokomoriya. Title: Party invitation required. Quirk mushroom. Bond level 94. Current level 20. Effective level 35. Attributes: Strength 18. Agility 24. Vitality 59. Intelligence 58. Dexterity 19. Luck 103. Free attributes 100. Perks: Party invitation required. Seeing Komori's bond level, IZUKU nearly did a double take. The two had never spoken before, but she apparently had quite a favorable impression of him. Charging toward the mushroom-themed heroine with his mask in place, IZUKU stopped just short of trampling her, crossing his arms and stating, "I would rather not harm you. Hand over the antifungal spray to negate your mushroom spores." Adopting a somewhat creepy smile, Komori gazed up at IZUKU, suspended a few meters off the ground with Black Whip. Her single visible eye looked like the brown cap of a sure-take mushroom, complete with white, X-shaped pupils. There was a perceptible glimmer of excitement within their depths, causing IZUKU's serious expression to cramp as she happily replied, "Hey there, IZUKU-kun, nenen is Kinokokomori. I'm, like, one of your biggest fans." Not doubting Komori's words in the least, Izuku somewhat shamelessly proposed, "Then that makes things simpler. If you give me the antifungal spray, I'll shake your hand or sign one of your personal effects." Catching Izuku a little off guard, Komori cutely replied, "I don't know if that's enough of an incentive. I could get in a lot of trouble with my classmates if I gave up without a fight." While spreading even more of her spores using the pistol-like dispensers in her hands. Resisting the urge to point out that he could capture and take the spray, Izuku crossed his arms and asked, "Then, what would it take for you to surrender and hand over the spray?" Adopting a broad smile, Komori replied, "Oh, it's simple really. You just need to locate and retrieve the spray directly. Do that and the spray is yours." As Komori didn't have any visible pockets or pouches on her costume, the only places she could be keeping the spray were within her fluffy sleeves, between her breasts, or inside her skirt. Komori's flared skirt resembled a cap of a mushroom with a broad hem, a design that would doubtlessly make her very popular among her fans, so there was a very good chance she had the spray strapped to her thigh. Smiling wryly, Izuku asked, "Are you trying to get me expelled?" Searching the body of a female student during an exam, even with her permission, is a good way to get reprimanded by our senseis. Tapping her chin with her index finger, Komori conceded, "You're probably right. I might have gotten a little ahead of myself, since this was our first time speaking directly. Now you probably think I'm weird. Huh?" Instead of refuting Komori's words, Izuku gave a weak shrug, responding, "There's nothing wrong with being a little quirky. Just keep in mind there's a time and a place for everything. Coaxing a male student to search your body in the middle of an exam isn't the wisest idea." Laughing with a nervous, slightly bashful smile, Komori replied, "When you put it that way, it's kind of embarrassing." Following her words, Komori half turned away, revealing that the spray bottle was, in fact, within her skirt as she reached beneath it to pull out a tiny container of clear liquid, holding it up as she said, "This is what you're looking for. I'll give it to you if you do me a little service first." Furrowing his brows slightly, Izuku replied, "That depends on what this service you're referring to entails." Smiling radiantly, Komori replied, "Oh, it's pretty simple. Just make a heart shape with your hands and say, 'Kanoko-chan is the cutest. Mushrooms are the best,' and I'll hand it over." Since he would rather not beat a girl, whose height barely came up to his chest, Izuku exhaled a faintly exasperated sigh before doing as Komori asked, albeit with limited enthusiasm. He might have if she were a villain or had malicious intentions, but he couldn't be overtly cruel to one of his self-professed biggest fans. After binding Komori in capture tape, an act she seemed to enjoy quite a bit, Izuku returned to Shoji, Toru, and the recently arrived Shinso to give his invisible girlfriend the antifungal spray. He would have helped her to remove the mushrooms directly if it were just the two of them, but as they were in the middle of an exam, Toru went to deal with the issue in private while Izuku remained behind to discuss strategy with Shinso and Ojiro. Voicing his thoughts aloud, Shinso ran his fingers through his purple hair, a deadpan expression on his face as he flatly remarked, "You should have formed the reconnaissance squad on your own. With your speed, power, and those BS tentacles, there isn't a single person in either of our classes that can stop you." "Maybe," admitted Izuku, "but that's ultimately just your assumption. I'm not invincible. So if Class 1B gathered the right members and caught me by surprise, they could take me out fairly easily. They just don't know how to utilize their quirks against human targets effectively, so they're holding back their true power. After all, this is an exam, not a real battlefield." "If you say so," replied Shinso, stopping his hand on the back of his neck to add, "Either way, now that you're here, you might as well help us wrap things up. Use those tentacles of yours to dig a hole into the enemy base. Our opponent seems to be able to soften inorganic matter, but he doesn't appear to be able to control it. Even if he hardens it again, he's basically a sitting duck without anyone to defend him. "Sounds good," replied IZUKU. "You're also the on-site commander, so if you think this is the best course of action, I'll follow your orders. What will you be doing in the meantime?" As IZUKU had brought Komori with him, almost like walking a child with a safety harness, Shinso answered, "My quirk can't transmit over electronic signals, so Ojiro-kun and I will take these two to the prison or watch over them until you can secure the enemy team's briefcase. So long as you can do that, nothing else matters." "Then, that's what I'll do," replied IZUKU, seeing the duo and their captives off before waiting for Toru to return. It took nearly 20 minutes for her to do so, but he didn't mind as it meant the other students, specifically his girls, would have more time to show off. By combining her powers with Achiko's, Mina created a 10m tall golem out of her acid, manipulating it like a puppet to prevent the members of Class 1B's assault team from approaching while Kirishima, Kaminari, and Sato protected them. Unable to conceal his admiration, Kirishima exclaimed, "This is way cool, Meijin-san. Those kids from Class 1B don't stand a chance against your acid titan." Adopting an uncharacteristically awkward smile, Mina replied, "Thanks, Kirishima-kun," while holding her fingers up next to her horns to control her creation. She knew Kirishima had a crush on her, even if he didn't, so it was a little awkward hearing him praise her all the time. Punching his hardened fists together, Kirishima said, "Right, I can't just stand by and let you do all the work. I'm going in." Without waiting for a response, Kirishima broke from his group's defensive formation, charging at a short, somewhat chubby kid with short, ice blue hair, a round face, large eyes, and a predominantly black, white-trimmed hero costume that looked like a muscle suit. If IZUKU had been present, he would have said the kid looked like a member of the Jinyu squad from Dragon Ball Z, complete with a blue scouter over his left eye. Seeing Kirishima charge at him, the stout youth, Niranjek Shota, looking anxious and naturally apologetic, muttered aloud, "Why is he coming over here?" while putting up his hands in a defensive posture. He and the other attack squad members had been unable to approach due to Mina's acid titan, so he didn't understand why Kirishima was rushing over when his team had an absolute advantage. Waiting until Kirishima had gotten fairly close, Shota punched the ground near his feet before leaping backward. His actions confused Kirishima at first, but it became clear what his intentions were when he activated his quirk, causing the ground beneath the fiery youth's feet to explode like a landmine. Since the explosion was the result of Shota's quirk, twin impact, not an actual landmine, Kirishima tore through the dust and debris, the surface of his body resembling jagged stone as he shouted, "Nice try, but you'll need more than that to take me out." Belying his stocky build, Shota backstepped, weaved, and dodged out of the way of Kirishima's attacks with practiced ease, his hands held close to his body like a boxer as he looked for openings in his opponent's defense. Whenever he uncovered one, he would throw a simple but swift jab before immediately resuming dodging, his expression looking progressively more worried as he softly remarked, "You shouldn't have come to attack me on your own." As soon as Shota finished speaking, Kirishima felt a heavy impact against his chest, emanating from one of the spots where his opponent's jabs had landed. A visible crack spread across his chest, causing blood to leak out, but he refused to back down, charging at Shota with reckless abandon as he shouted, "You pack one hell of a punch, man, but if that's the best you can do, this match is mine." By hardening his body even further, Kirishima barely felt it when Shota triggered his quirk a second and third time, causing pieces of his body to flake off like chipped stone, but ultimately doing little damage as he strung together an increasingly tight series of punches and kicks. Realizing that Kirishima wouldn't be defeated with his usual methods, the look of concern on Shota's face became increasingly prominent. His full-powered punches were strong on their own, but when combined with his quirk, they were terrifyingly potent. He had been learning hand-to-hand since he was a child to avoid seriously injuring people, so opponents like Kirishima were a terrible matchup against his fairly passive nature. Fortunately, just as Shota was forming the resolve to throw a marginally more serious punch, one of his teammates, a boy wearing a casual drill-themed hero costume stepped in shouting, "Heads up, Rock Boy! This is going to hurt!" Spinning his right arm and fingers at a tremendous speed, the boy, Sun Kaibara, impacted Kirishima's left forearm, chipping off several rock-like fragments thanks to the drill-like bits on his fingers. Unlike Shota, he had very little qualms about using his quirk against others. So, with Kirishima being a rock, he decided to play the part of a strip miner. "Ow, ow, ow. That really freaking hurts!" exclaimed Kirishima, doing his best to break free from Kaibara's assault, but struggling due to a slight difference in speed. The harder his body became, the more difficult it was for him to move freely. He could remedy this by making his body soft, but then he would have no way to defend himself against Kaibara's attacks. Just as Kirishima thought he would be overwhelmed, a powerful stream of pH-neutral acid impacted Kaibara's body with the force of a fire hose. He didn't sustain any injuries, but he was sent sliding a considerable distance and struggled to recover due to the acid being extremely slippery. Before Kirishima could think to thank her, Mina screamed, "Get back here, you stupid blockhead!" with a frustrated, visibly annoyed look on her face. She appreciated that Kirishima was doing his best to behave like the man he aspired to become, but charging haphazardly into the enemy when you had no idea what they were capable of was just reckless. Realizing he had made Mina angry, Kirishima scratched the back of his head, an awkward laugh briefly emanating from his throat before he turned to Shota, a more natural smile adorning his face as he said, "It was a great fight. You're really strong for such a little guy. Let's do this again sometime, okay?" Though he and Shota were still enemies, Kirishima extended his fist for the much shorter youth to bump. Shota was a bit taken aback by this, believing Kirishima might be trying to trick him, but since he could always activate his quirk to trigger a second impact, he ultimately reciprocated the gesture before watching in dumbfounded silence as the hot-blooded redhead returned to his team to receive a berating, with Toru accompanying him, largely because she had nothing better to do. IZUKU used Black Whip like a shovel to scoop at the mud-like remains of Class 1B's headquarters, making steady progress until he reached an underground room that was unaffected by the softening quirk. Dropping into said room, IZUKU encountered a fairly tall figure, wearing a costume similar to Ida's. Instead of the predominantly white coloration of Ida's costume, however, his was primarily clay-colored, appearing orange over a base of black. It actually looked pretty badass, especially with a streamlined black helmet and breathing apparatus, but IZUKU hadn't come there to admire his opponent's outfit, stating, "Hand over the briefcase," in a firm tone. "Sorry, but I can't do that," replied the man, adopting a combat pose as he added, My friends and classmates are counting on me. Nem, Jifo Honinikai. Title, Party Invitation Required. Quirk, Softening. Bond level, 56. Current level, 24. Effective level, 47. Attributes, Strength, 42. Agility, 37. Vitality, 108. Intelligence, 61. Dexterity, 51. Luck, 72. Free attributes, 120. Perks party invitation required. Nodding in approval, IZUKU remarked, "You certainly aren't lacking in conviction. But, as you cannot move the briefcase, you are limited in how you can use your quirk. Even if you tried dropping the roof down on top of me, it would only slow us down. Since my mobility is much higher, it would only take a few seconds for me to capture you." Lowering his stance even further, Hananuki replied, "That might be the case, but a real hero never gives up, no matter how the odds are stacked against them. So long as there are people counting on me, I'll find a way dash." Before Hananuki could finish his motivational speech, Aizawa's lazy voice came over the speakers permeating the city, stating, "The Foundational Heroics first term practical exam is now over. Class 1A was the first to recover the opponent's briefcase and input the shutdown sequence for the villain robots, so they're the victors. All students are to gather at the rendezvous point within the next 15 minutes. Turning on his heels, Hananuki's eyes widened beneath his mask as he saw the briefcase he was meant to be protecting wide open. At the same time, an incredibly excited and bubbly girl's voice exclaimed, "Score 1000 for Stealth Hero, Invisible Girl." Since Toru was currently bereft of her gloves and boots, no one could see her throwing up double peace signs before she ran over and pounced on IZUKU, nearly triggering his tripping perk. Fortunately, just as they were about to fall over, placing themselves in a fairly awkward position, IZUKU supported them upright with Black Whip, smiling wryly as he whispered, "I get that you're happy, but don't forget the situation," while patting Toru's invisible head. He ordinarily would have cupped her pillowy bottom and given her a deep kiss. But even if she were invisible, it would have been fairly obvious what they were doing to any observers. While pretending to laugh bashfully, Toru exploited her invisible status to press her thigh against IZUKU's crotch. She absolutely adored being in the spotlight. So now that she had scored 1,000 points for her team, she really wanted someone to praise her for it. Luckily, they had the following few days off, transitioning into the final week before summer break. So she was confident she could get IZUKU to reward her plenty before his birthday celebration on the 15th, with Class 1A securing a fairly one-sided victory over Class 1B. It wasn't surprising that the latter students were in fairly low spirits once everyone had gathered at the rendezvous point. As the commander and representative of her class, Kendo in particular, wore a sad smile as she faced her classmates and said, "Sorry everyone. I suspected that Class 1A might be stronger than us, but I didn't think we would lose so thoroughly. If I had devised a better strategy, things might have been different." "It's not your fault," shouted a girl with blonde hair, large eyes, and facial features that made her look like the humanoid version of a My Little Pony character. Shaking her head, Kendo said, "Thanks, Tsunatori-san, but as the leader of our team, the responsibility for our loss falls to me. If this had been a real battle, it saddens me to imagine what might have happened." "I agree with Tsunatori-san," said a boy with pitch-black skin and wild, spiky, ashen hair. "The odds were too heavily stacked against us. That monster with the ice powers aside, Class 1A also has the overall winner of the sports festival with them. Even if several of us teamed up, I don't think we could defeat him." As one of the people IZUKU had defeated, Tokage appended, "Yeah, that Midoriya-kun is a beast. I don't think there's a single student in our entire school that can beat him. If we ignored him, he might have been able to secure enough points for his team to win without stealing our briefcase." With Class 1B openly discussing him, IZUKU offered a smile and a wave when several of them looked his way. Most of them furrowed their brows in response, but Komori returned a smile and wave, her bond level sitting at a somewhat disconcerting 98 after their previous interaction. Interrupting the discussions between the two classes, Aizawa and Vlad King approached after exiting the observation tower, the former wearing his usual apathetic expression as he said, "Quiet down and listen up. We have a few things to say before dismissing you." Nodding his head, Vlad added, "That's right. We understand that some of you might be dissatisfied with the exam's format and results. However, as disappointing as this may be to hear, that's just the way life is at times. If you are serious about becoming a pro hero, you can't expect fairness and opportunities to be handed to you. You need to work hard, push yourself beyond your limits, and create opportunities to shine. Resenting others or blaming fate for dealing you a poor hand isn't the mentality of a hero. It's the excuse villains give themselves to justify their actions." Adding to Vlad's words, Aizawa expressed, "No matter how powerful an individual is, they cannot be everywhere or save everyone. If you give up improving yourselves because there's someone better than you, people, families, and children that you could have saved will be consigned to their fates. There is nothing wrong with aiming for the top, but if that's the only thing driving you to be a hero, it would be better if you dropped out now. When you are pulling someone from the wreckage of a destroyed building or saving them from an inferno, they don't care what your rank is. At that moment, you are the greatest hero in the world. Remember that, With Aizawa's words sending chills through their bodies, nearly every student within Class 1A and 1B had a serious, resolute expression on their faces. Todoroki in particular stared down at his left hand, recalling what Izuku had said to him during the sports festival, and the look on his mother's face when he visited and forgave her rather than telling her she had done nothing wrong. Coughing to gather everyone's attention, Vlad added, "That being said, those who wish to display their abilities in a less weighted scenario are welcome to return this afternoon. It may not drastically affect your final grade for the term, but it's an opportunity to earn a few additional points. If you're skirting the line, it could make all the difference." Hearing they would be able to take a supplemental exam, the students of Class 1B exhaled a collective sigh of relief. Those in charge of defending the prison had basically stood around the entire exam since none of Class 1A had been captured. They were worried they would fail due to a lack of contribution, so they were relieved to be given a second chance to exhibit their aptitudes. Fortunately, this supplementary exam merely pitted them against a group of villain robots, allowing them to choose an amount they were comfortable with before fighting against them solo. As he was tied with Momo in academics and had amassed the second highest score in the practical, Izuku didn't require the additional points offered by the afternoon exam. He was going to attend anyways, just to cheer his classmates on. But Toru had other ideas, practically dragging him back to his house so she could receive her reward. As a result, Izuku was reaming her from behind, the sound of flesh smacking against flesh echoing throughout his bathroom as they shaboinked in the shower. "Oh, gods, I love doing it bareback!" exclaimed Toru. The reward she asked for was doing it raw, so Izuku obliged on the condition he would be loading outside, unleashing his seed on her indescribably beautiful rear and back. With the school giving them a rare 3-day weekend, Izuku woke up on Saturday morning with nothing to do. The simplest thing to do would be to use the time to prepare for the CBEs, but before that, he was obligated to check his phone at least once. As the girls had agreed not to DM him unless it was a pressing matter or related to an upcoming event or date, the only private texts Izuku had been from Mirko. She usually texted him around the time his alarm was set to go off. So Izuku wasn't surprised to find he had several messages, the first a fairly ordinary greeting, and the remainder asking why he wasn't responding. Reading through the messages, Izuku couldn't help smiling until he read the very last one. It was only from around 20 minutes ago, and it said that if he continued ignoring her, she was coming over to beat his ass. Feeling his intuition trigger, Izuku rapidly typed, "I'm fine, Rumi. I just had the day off, so I slept in a bit. Sorry for responding so late." Though it wasn't immediate, Izuku breathed a sigh of relief when Mirko sent him a response. When he read it, however, a mixture of excitement and trepidation swelled within him as it stated, "I'm already in Shizuoka," followed by, "You have the day off?" While Shizuoka was a fairly large prefecture, Izuku knew it would only take Mirko a few minutes to reach Mizudafo, even if she were on the furthest border. Thus, after a moment of deliberation, he responded, "Well, if you're already here, want to meet up somewhere?" Responding immediately, Izuku could feel the assertion in Mirko's text as she replied, "I'm coming to you. I have business with that rat principal, so just stay there." Understanding that Mirko would probably track him down with the party's proximity function if he attempted to run, Izuku adopted a wry smile as he typed, "I'm looking forward to it." His recent interchanges with Mirko made it clear there was more to her 100 bond than simple shaboink addiction, so this was a decent opportunity to confirm things. Thus, after Mirko responded with a curt, "I'll be there soon," he sent a message to the girls to tell them he would be indisposed for the rest of the day. Fortunately, as fate would have it, the girls had already decided to give him some space for the next 2 days as they were busy preparing for his birthday. In other words, he had the entire day, potentially 2, to dedicate to his favorite rabbit. Name: Rumi Usajiyama. Title: Voracious Rabbit. Attributes increase randomly during Shaboink. Quirk Rabbit. Bond level, 100. Current level, 84. Effective level, 219. Attributes: Strength, 388. Agility, 442. Vitality, 647. Intelligence, 50. Dexterity, 460. Luck, 628. Free attributes, 5. Perks: Fleet-footed, thunderous thighs, healthy body, second wind, keen senses, lucky rabbit's foot. Though it took nearly 2 hours, presumably due to her meeting with the principal, IZUKU eventually received a text from Mirko informing him that she was outside. Instead of standing out front, however, she was waiting for him behind his house, dressed in fairly casual clothes that included a plain white t-shirt, form-fitting black jeans, a studded leather jacket, and, somewhat surprisingly, heels. She also had a large gym bag sitting on the ground, but IZUKU didn't pay much attention to it, smiling as he said, "It's been way too long." Snorting through her nose, Mirko argued, "Don't be such a sap. If you wanted to see me, you could have visited me on the weekend. Besides, didn't you have those little high school brats to accompany you? I doubt you even thought about me between our text exchanges." Playing with fire, IZUKU retorted, "If you truly believe that, we might need to boost your intelligence a bit more." Narrowing her eyes, Mirko asked, "Are you calling me stupid?" Before proceeding to pop her knuckles, adding, "It has been a while since I kicked your butt." "It's been a while since we've done many things," replied IZUKU, smiling fearlessly as he asked, "How about we start with a kiss? Everything else can come after." Discontinuing popping her knuckles, Mirko remarked, "You've grown up a bit since I last saw you. It makes me want to knock you down a few pegs, but I suppose it can wait." Stepping closer to IZUKU, Mirko ran her fingers through his fringe bangs, an incredibly alluring smile developing across her face as she added, "If you were a real man, you wouldn't have asked." Interpreting Mirko's words as permission, IZUKU didn't hesitate to place his hands on her pert, incredibly taut behind as he kissed her deeply and passionately. The disparity in their heights had increased since he last saw her, but he actually preferred shorter women, not because he liked dainty and petite girls, but because he loved picking them up by but to kiss them. Not content with being manhandled, Mirko took things quite a bit further by wrapping her legs around IZUKU's waist, ensnaring him like a bear trap as she linked her arms around his neck and shoulders. It had only been a month and a half since they last saw each other, but it had felt like years, her body burning up just from being in contact with him. Surprising IZUKU a second time, Mirko revealed, "I brought it," between assailing his mouth with kisses. He didn't know what she was referring to at first, but things became clear when she abruptly gripped his hair with her left hand, bringing her lips to his ear and whispering, "You wanted to shaboink me in my high school uniform, right? I brought it along with several other outfits." Retracting her face so she could stare IZUKU in his eyes, Mirko licked her lips and threatened, "You have 3 minutes to take me somewhere we can shaboink. I don't care if it's your bedroom or right here. I'm going to milk you so thoroughly you won't be able to walk come Monday." "We'll use my bedroom," replied IZUKU without a moment's hesitation. Fortunately, the not-so-secret entrance to his room was at the back of the house. Mirko laughed her ass off when she learned about it, but that didn't stop her from crawling in first, providing IZUKU a tantalizing view of her rear as they navigated the narrow, duck-like path before climbing the ladder, connecting to the hatch in his closet. "So this is your room?" asked Mirko. "I thought you said it was messy. Was that just a lie to get me to spread my legs?" While making his way over to ensure his door was properly secure, IZUKU replied, "I also told you about the girls in my class. They come over often, so I keep it clean to avoid having them try to pick up after me." Sniffing the air, using her nose that was 20 times more powerful than a normal human's, Mirko remarked, "Now that you mention it, it does smell like several bitches in heat. One of the odors is pretty recent, too. Did you shaboink someone in here recently?" Though she had permitted IZUKU to fool around with the girls in his class, even congratulating him when she learned about his engagement, Mirko couldn't help feeling like someone had intruded on her territory when she smelled another woman's scent in his room. She was a very competitive woman by nature, so she had a sudden and intense desire to erase every other scent present, supplanting it with her own. Since it wasn't a secret, IZUKU responded, "Yeah. Toru managed to clinch our class's victory in the practical exam yesterday, so I rewarded her by shaboinking her senseless." Catching IZUKU a little off guard, Mirko conceded, "That certainly sounds like something you'd do." Before discarding her jacket and removing her t-shirt, releasing her sizable, gravity-defying breasts. Then, while taking off her pants, she stared directly at him and said, "I saw my title. Did you give that to me? Or was it something that appeared on its own?" "It appeared on its own," replied IZUKU, adopting a cheeky smile as he added, "Though, to be honest, it suits you quite a bit." Though she narrowed her eyes slightly, Mirko didn't chastise IZUKU for his remark. Instead, she half-turned to pick up her gym bag, bending over in a way that intentionally emphasized her perfect rear as she said, "When I first saw it, a single thought entered my mind. Do you want to know what it was?" Without waiting for IZUKU to respond, Mirko began to sway her rear from side to side, her rabbit-like tail twitching as she revealed, "I thought that you must be pretty desperate to make me yours, providing me a means to get stronger that takes advantage of my shabowinkingly charged nature. You're a bad man, IZUKUMidoriya." Rising to her full height, Mirko combed back the hair that had fallen over her face, staring directly at IZUKU with an incredibly sensual smile as she purred, "Consider this your true final exam for the first term. Prove to me that you have what it takes to hold my reins, and I'll keep shadowinking you until one of us becomes a corpse." Though her words sounded like a threat, IZUKU understood that Mirko was saying she would be with him until death. It was basically a proposal, just significantly less direct and a lot more sensual, borderline animalistic. In essence, Mirko wasn't looking for a spouse or a lover. She was looking for a mate. Instead of responding to Mirko with words, IZUKU tore open the front of his pants, releasing his fully macho meat grinder. Doing so caused a hungry gleam to flash across Mirko's carmine eyes. But as she had already decided they would be kicking things off in her high school uniform, she suppressed her urges long enough to don a pleated, turquoise skirt, a white blouse that was incredibly tight around her chest, a red ribbon, and loose socks. Interrupting IZUKU's intense focus, Mirko took a moment to adjust her skirt, eventually giving up on fastening it properly as she asked, "Do you know why I ran back to Okinoshima to bring these clothes over?" Blinking in surprise, IZUKU suppressed the urge to ask if she was serious about running more than 1,200 kilometers to retrieve a bag of clothes. Instead, he replied, "Tell me," with a serious, anticipatory look. Adopting a wistful smile, Mirko revealed, "I don't really understand it, but I couldn't stop thinking back to what you said about wishing you were my first. I usually don't think about the past, but those words kept grating on me for the past month and a half. That's when I decided that, since I can't give you my first, I'll let you shaboink me in every outfit I wore back in the day. If you think you have what it takes." Raising the front of her skirt, revealing her moist undies and beautiful, glistening thighs, Mirko's voice became a low growl as she said, "This is your chance to overwrite those memories. Shaboink me so thoroughly and completely that every time I see these clothes, the only memories that come to mind are the ones we share." Maintaining his serious expression, IZUKU approached Mirko, towering over her quite a bit as he abruptly picked her up, forcing her up against the wall of his bedroom as he asserted, "I'm going to do so much more than that." Undaunted by IZUKU's words, Mirko wrapped her legs around him anew, pulling him snug up against her as she said, "Talk is cheap. Show me with your actions." More than 24 hours had passed since she and IZUKU started shaboinking. As a result, her body was in a truly agonizing amount of pleasure, but she couldn't stop. At this point, the only person who could bring things to an end was IZUKU, but he kept tormenting her without end, whispering loving words, that caused her brain to tingle while he came over and over and over again, providing Rumi the smallest glimmer of hope. A knock suddenly came from IZUKU's door, followed by the sound of his mother's voice coming over the intercom he had installed, asking, "Izuku-chan, are you in there, sweetie? Since you're going to be busy tomorrow, I invited Tashinori-kun to celebrate your birthday a little early." "Oh, thank God," thought Rumi, falling backward and sprawling out atop Izuku's legs. Her body protested, but now that they had a reason to stop, the spell preventing her from doing so was broken. Rising to a seated position, Izuku rubbed Rumi's belly with his palm, his expression and tone gentle as he said, "Looks like we'll have to continue our Shaboink Fest another time. Go ahead and head over to the shower. I'll be there in a moment." Staring down at Izuku from her lying position, Rumi remarked, "You need to take your meat grinder out of my womb first." "Right," replied Izuku, breaking the seal of Rumi's cervix and allowing a startling amount of carrot juice to burst out of her. The thing he had been patting was the conspicuous bulge his load had created in her belly. Did all of that seriously come from my balls? For 1000 is no joke! Rumi was seriously tempted to close her eyes and fall asleep. Before she could, Izuku gave her outer thigh a light smack, saying, "Sleep after we've washed up and changed my bedding. I don't mind lending you my bed." Ugh. Rolling off of Izuku's legs and onto her stomach, Rumi briefly considered rolling onto the floor before turning her body and sitting upright. Her body felt unbelievably lethargic, like she had an intense fever, but she managed to get to her feet, her perfect rear swaying like the ring of a hypnotist as she meandered her way to the bathroom. "I'm going to shaboink that woman so hard," thought Izuku, tearing his eyes from Rumi's, but at the last moment to hurriedly make his way to the door, pressing the intercom button to answer, "I'll be out in a few minutes, Ka-chan." Though she had already turned to leave, Inko came back to ask Izuku if everything was okay and if she should prepare another plate downstairs. Izuku hesitated to answer, but Rumi, having heard Inko's query from the bathroom, called out, "I already told you I don't give a shit if people learn of our relationship. I'll have to meet your mother sooner or later, so I may as well join you for breakfast, lunch, or whatever." As he also wasn't ashamed of his relationship with Rumi, even if they were just mates, Izuku pressed the intercom's speech button and responded in the affirmative. What followed was an incredibly awkward scenario, where his mother practically stared daggers at Rumi, not expecting the girl Izuku was keeping in his room to be so old. But with Tashinori helping to lighten the mood, things weren't too bad. "Do you really have to go?" asked Izuku, seeing Rumi off at one of the school's more isolated gates. Furrowing her brows, Rumi replied, "Don't be overly sentimental. It's not like this is the last we'll be seeing each other. Just let me know when your summer training camp ends. You can come to my place, and I'll train you a bit before the second term." Reminded by Rumi's words, Izuku revealed, "The girls will be spending the final few weeks of summer break at one of the Yairozu estates. I won't force you, but I'd like you to meet them." Rolling her eyes, Rumi replied, "Yeah, whatever. Just don't expect me to play nice. I've never been good at sharing, so if those brats try to get in my way, I'll have to teach them who's at the top of the pecking order." Adopting a smile, Izuku mused, "Just don't go too overboard," before giving Rumi a light smack on her bottom, grabbing a handful of her Giat cheek in the process. Regaining a hint of the timidness she had shown near the end of their 27-hour Shaboink Fest, Rumi's expression became incomparably alluring as she asked, "Are you trying to get me to pounce on you right here?" "It wouldn't be the first time I shaboinked outdoors," admitted Izuku. "But I know there are villains waiting to have their asses kicked and people who depend on you to save them, so I won't monopolize you too much. Just prepare yourself for the next time. I'm still not convinced your heart and body belong to me completely, so I intend to keep shaboinking you like a beast until you submit fully." Punctuating his words, Izuku gave Rumi's rabbit-like tail a light pinch. It was an especially sensitive part of her body, so an electric-like shock ran up her spine as he did so. Unfortunately, not that he had any complaints, His actions were the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. Rumi was already at her limit, so she abruptly threw him over her shoulder and carried him deeper into the surrounding forest, away from any footpaths or prying eyes, before throwing him down and attacking him in the middle of a clearing.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going. Plus, it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.